Chapter 264, Dragon Claw Powder, Powder Number 1. In a dim corner of the common room, 3 wizards with oddly twisted eyes huddled together. They spoke in hushed tones, as if determined to keep their conversation secret, but their words carried unmistakably across the room. Harry, just waking from his seat and stretching before heading off to the Great Hall with Ron, stopped in his tracks. Almost everyone else in the lounge had gone silent too, drawn in by the conspicuous whispering. The shortest of the 3 leaned forward, voice low but eager. "Which spell from basic spells for busy and fidgety people do you think is best to learn first?" Harry felt a spark of pride. He was a Ravenclaw, after all, and delighted whenever anyone showed a hunger for knowledge. He'd read that very book cover to cover and could not resist mulling over the question. To him, 3 stood head and shoulders above the rest. 1. The hard tongue curse. It prevents an opponent from articulating any words, even the simplest incantation, unless they can cast spells silently. Rendered speechless, a duelist becomes all but helpless. 2. The pepper curse. A well-placed sneeze can garble an opponent's words mid-chant, causing their spell to misfire or even rebound disastrously. 3. The head shaving charm. It might sound purely cosmetic, but Harry had discovered it could strip body hair just as swiftly as it could whisk off someone's entire hairstyle. An unexpectedly effective and humiliating trick in the right hands. As Harry weighed these possibilities, he realized that even the smallest, most offhanded enchantment could turn the tide of a duel, especially in the fast-paced, unpredictable world of novice spellcasters. He glanced at the trio of students now deep in discussion, wondering which one would dare to master Powder Number 1 first. The classroom buzzed with excited chatter as Professor Caro demonstrated the new hair trimming enchantment. Unlike more dangerous curses, this spell only severs hair. It can't harm anything else. Just then, the stocky boy seated to the left of Harry's short, red-headed friend leaned forward. "Avada eats a big melon," he announced with a grin. "Nice and simple. Efficient, too." He plucked a stray lock from the tabletop demonstration and held it between thumb and forefinger. "That'll be 1 galleon." Harry, about to applaud the clever phrasing, paused mid-clap. Ron's jaw dropped alongside his. Neither of them had seen so much as a hint of an unforgivable curse in their textbook. Ron was sure the other student had handed over a copper nut until the chubby boy snapped his teeth around the lock of hair. "Delicious," he declared. "Pure gold." From the back row, a tall, gangly 7th-year shot the fat boy a scornful look. "I can't agree with you," he said, voice rising. "You're missing the point. The real power comes when you infuse the hair-cutting enchantment with freshly brewed polyjuice potion. That magic circle you draw channels the spell's energy, and it directly affects a Nimbus 2001's stress tolerance. If you want to push a broomstick faster without it shattering, you'd better get your potion-to-incantation ratios right." He paused for dramatic effect, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses higher on his nose. "Besides," he continued, "our entire wizarding economy depends on precision like this. Take the robes from Tiverton's tailoring. Every year they're cutting back on unicorn hair lining. We're already down to what, 17%? Do you know what that does to supply chains? Social stability? Let me give you a clearer example." As the lanky student unrolled a parchment covered in arcane symbols, Harry exchanged a wide-eyed glance with Ron. Defense against the dark arts had never felt quite this complicated. Chapter 7. A Misguided Experiment. Whenever you cast a spell, Professor Bletchley had warned the 4th years, the magical currents in your bloodstream react with your saliva to produce Coquette's elixir. Better known in some circles as Gamp's potion of deformation, its uncontrolled creation could throw the entire population of magical creatures out of balance. Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered looks. "I swear, Harry, I felt more like a muggle just now," Ron muttered, rubbing his jaw. "And those golden galleons?" Harry added after a moment. "They're not pure gold, just fairy smelted ore, melted and reforged twice." 10 minutes later, Penello, Ravenclaw's prefect and student council president, strode into the common room, her expression grim. Only then did the pieces click into place. "There are still 5 months until finals," Ron burst out. "We're 4th years. OWLs don't start until 5th, and NUTs aren't until 7th. Why would anyone think of smoking Dragonclaw powder? And if they did, they bought the wrong stuff. It's just dried rubbish. Who Maisie Hawks as a prank? Harry's concern deepened. I hope there won't be any lasting side effects. Do you think Madame Pomfrey can fix them? Pinello hesitated, glancing toward the corridor that led to the infirmary. We'll find out soon enough, she said. Today's Saturday, so she should be here. Let's hope she's got a remedy for whatever they've done. As they hurried down Hogwarts's winding halls, the weekend stretched ahead of them, heavy with uncertainty. The day after tomorrow is the team competition for the second event, and Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny had planned to celebrate afterward at Hagrid's hut. Hagrid had finally installed a Muggle television and was glued to a cooking show called A Bite of Britain. He insisted it would help him master a few new recipes. But when the trio arrived that afternoon, Harry and Ron looked as if they'd just run a marathon. You two look dreadful, Ginny said, finishing her lipstick and hurrying over to Harry. Why don't you head back to the dorm and get some rest before tomorrow? Ron scoffed. Rest? Hardly. We're perfectly fine, just annoyed. He crossed his arms and shot Harry a knowing glance. Someone's been tampering with our supplies. Ginny raised an eyebrow. Tampering how? Harry took a deep breath. They swapped out the dragon claw powder in our cauldron kit. Ginny's mouth fell open. They? What? With an air of grim satisfaction, Ron continued. They replaced it with dried fox droppings. Ginny wrinkled her nose. That must reek. Surprisingly, Harry said. Once it's fully dried, fox droppings are almost odorless. Exactly the same as properly pulverized dragon talons, no tell smell to give it away. Ron tapped his foot. If this had been Gryffindors or Hufflepuffs, I'd blame a careless mistake. But Ravenclaws, they're too meticulous. This was deliberate sabotage. Ginny's face hardened. That's rotten, even for a prank. Harry rested a hand on her shoulder. Tomorrow we'll keep a close eye on our gear, and on our so-called friends. We'll be ready. Ron scowled at Ginny's story. Why won't the Slytherins just own up? They're acting like trolls. Ginny shot him a withering look. Have you asked Draco? You're supposed to be friends. Pansy and I only bonded through him. The other day she let slip their little exam secret, dragon claw powder. It's pricey, but for most Slytherins that's no obstacle. It has no side effects and gives you a sharp edge for a few hours. Ron's eyes narrowed. But that's cheating. Technically, it isn't banned, Ginny explained. Compare it to the Baffi brain elixir. They say that permanently boosts your mental acuity. Sounds better, right? Only the problem is, it's fiendishly difficult to brew. Even veteran potion masters mess it up, and there's no way to tell until it's too late. Take the wrong dose, and you'd turn into a total idiot. Ron ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So they get a shortcut with dragon claw powder, and there's nothing we can do? Ginny shrugged. Not unless someone declares it illegal. Until then, dragon claw powder stays just another expensive study aid, albeit a perfectly legal one. It's supposed to sharpen your mind and keep you from making silly mistakes on exams, Ginny explained as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Imagine if Hogwarts actually had its own dragon farm. Dragon claw powder could be handed out in every class like vitamin supplements. Typical, Ron muttered under his breath. All the perks go to the rich wizards. Then he straightened up and added, Hey, I'm rich too. Why can't I get my hands on any? He ran a hand through his hair, still smarting from the realization that he'd blown a small fortune on bespoke house robes, vials of dragon's blood ink, rolls of dragonhide bandages, and a host of other expensive novelty items. Ginny sighed and gave him a sympathetic look. Listen, Ron, there's actually no reliable test for real dragon claw powder. Unless you personally clip a live dragon's talons and grind them yourself, you're almost certainly buying some knockoff, probably just powder spiked with a bit of scaling pudding elixir or fizzing whiz-bang residue. Ron's face turned an uneasy shade of green. They do that? They do, Ginny confirmed. Dragon farms are few and far between, and demand for claw powder far outstrips supply. Pureblood families who own those farms have a virtual monopoly. They guard every last shard of claw, never mind grinding it down and selling it to some random wizard outside their circle. In our world, lineage and pureblood privilege still count for everything. Ron stared at her in stunned silence, already feeling the galleons in his vault losing value. Ginny could only shake her head. In the magical community, bloodlines remained the most powerful currency of all. That's exactly how the Slytherins pull it off, Ginny said, folding her arms. The wizards who run dragon farms hand out Dragonclaw powder to win people over and keep their alliances intact. As for you, Ron, you'd better buckle down on your studies. You're not less clever than the rest of us, just a bit lazy. Ron shot her an exasperated look. So even if I manage to get my hands on Dragonclaw powder, I'm still expected to grovel before those horrid Slytherins? If I'd known, I never would have let Charlie take Norbert off to that dragon farm in Romania. I'd be swimming in Dragonclaw powder by now. Ginny sighed sympathetically. I know, but that's the reality of it. The powers that be love to keep everyone dependent on them. Besides, Dragonclaw powder isn't the only way to build influence. Hard work and good grades go a long way, too. Ron slumped back in his chair. Great, so I have to choose between sucking up to Slytherins or actually studying. He ran a hand through his hair. Honestly, Ginny, why can't magic just be fun for once? Ginny gave him a wry smile. If it were that simple, we wouldn't see half the alliances and backroom deals we do. Now come on, let's hit the library before classes start tomorrow. You'll thank me later. Chapter 678, Another Explanation of the Puzzle. Let's head to Hagrid's, Ron suggested, shouldering his bag. I've a feeling he's secretly raising dragons again. Without stopping for breakfast, Harry, Ron, and Hermione set off down the path toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Their concern wasn't born of mistrust. Hagrid had always been a loyal friend, but they knew him all too well. With his immense strength and affinity for magical creatures, Hagrid could easily conceal 4 or 5 young dragons in the forest, far from curious eyes. Since the first task, rumors had swirled that Hagrid might still be caring for the 4-headed dragon that had appeared in the Triwizard Tournament. Given Hagrid's history, he'd been implicated in smuggling dangerous beasts before. It was entirely possible he'd succumb to the temptation of raising dragons in secret. Harry felt a knot of worry tighten in his chest. Back at the Ministry, the newly reorganized Fire Dragon Research and Restriction Bureau was drafting regulations, licensing exams for dragon handlers, approved breeding facilities, and formal research protocols. Those changes had lured Charlie Weasley back to work in China, where he'd been advising on best practices for safe, humane dragon care. But none of these measures had been officially ratified yet. Let's get this sorted before word gets out, Hermione urged. Her brow furrowed. Harry nodded. If Hagrid really is sheltering dragons on his land, we need to know why, and how we can help him stay within the new regulations. They strode on, determined that by the time they reached Hagrid's door, they would have answers, or at least a plan. Charlie Weasley was still in Romania, caring for the 4 fire breathers chosen for the upcoming dragon competition. But back at Hogwarts, Hagrid was growing restless, much to Harry's suspicion that his half-giant friend was up to his old tricks again. Ginny insisted on tagging along when Harry and Ron set out for Hagrid's hut. She claimed it was to keep an eye on Harry and Ron, just in case they got into any mischief. Ron, for his part, only had one goal in mind. He needed a fresh supply of Dragonclaw powder for his potions. By the time they reached Hagrid's ramshackle door at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, each of them nursed a secret hope. Harry suspected a dragon was stashed inside. Ron simply hoped for plenty of powder. Ginny, well, she just didn't trust the 2 boys to behave. Harry knocked. The door creaked open to reveal Hagrid's enormous grin, and then Fang shot past him and flung himself at Harry, tongue lolling as he drenched Harry's robes in slobber. Fang! Ugh! Stop that! Harry shoved the dog gently away, brushing at his front. Hagrid laughed, his beard shaking. Well, ain't this a surprise? Harry, Ron, Ginny, what are you lot up to? Harry cut straight to the point. Where's the fire dragon, Hagrid? Pride lit Hagrid's eyes. He stroked his tangled beard. Told you I'd have something special for you before month's end, and here he is. Harry's face fell. You know dragons aren't allowed at Hogwarts. This is illegal, Hagrid. Without missing a beat, Ron pulled a small, well-worn satchel from his bag and shook it in front of Hagrid's nose. Look, genuine Dragonclaw powder. Definitely proof that you've been up to something with dragons. Hagrid's grin widened and he stepped aside. All right, come on in. I'll show you what I've been working on. But first, hand over that powder. I'll have to top mine up. Hands trembling with excitement, Harry and Ron followed Hagrid into the hut. Ginny close behind, eager to see exactly what the half-giant had been hiding. Hagrid leaned warily against his workbench, eyeing the three impatient faces before him. "Well, what would you prefer, then? Should I give the little dragons a quick manicure?" Ginny threw up her hands. "Hagrid, please, no more riddles. Just tell us what's really going on." He scratched the back of his head, clearly confused. "Riddles? This is an official Ministry of Magic assignment. It isn't I, Legel, and Ron. There aren't any dragons in my hut." Harry and Ginny froze, exchanging astonished glances. If Hagrid truly had no dragons, their suspicions had been completely off the mark. Ron, oblivious to their shock, only brightened. "You don't have dragons? But you're of age now. Bigger claws would mean more dragon blood powder." Hagrid's expression turned grave. "Dragon blood powder? Claws? Are you suggesting I'm training some beast to fight a Chinese fireball?" Ron's brow furrowed. "Fight? No, I thought you raised it for competitions." Harry's voice was quiet but insistent. "Professor, have you been secretly raising a dragon?" Hagrid blinked in genuine surprise. "Raising dragons? No, there's been a misunderstanding. All I'm doing is caring for a clutch of eggs." Ron nearly stumbled backward. "Eggs? You've been keeping dragon eggs here?" Ginny leaned forward, eyes alight with curiosity. "But how is that possible?" Hagrid gave a sheepish shrug. "Like I said, it's a ministry-sanctioned project. Just some warm, safe quarters for those eggs until they hatch. Nothing more, for now." Harry frowned as he read the parchment again. "Ginny, didn't you realize the second task would be dragon riding? Why didn't that clue leap out at us sooner?" Ginny tapped her quill against the table. "We worked out the dragon part right away. It was the Vila riddle that puzzled us. But now that we've pieced it together, everything makes perfect sense." Harry leaned forward. "Explain." Ginny took a deep breath. "Look back at the lines we rushed through. They weren't just flowery description, they were instructions. To solve the puzzle, you had to bring the fire drake figurine and take flight at extreme altitude. Remember those scorch marks we spotted in the Forbidden Forest? Hagrid left them deliberately. He knew you'd have to cross the forest eventually, and he wanted you to follow the dragon's trail." Harry's eyes widened. "So Hagrid arranged the whole thing and masked the evidence so we wouldn't suspect a thing." Ginny nodded. "Exactly. Since we were snooping around at night, the dragon Hagrid sent in never breathed flame. We barely noticed the embers on the trees. And because we already figured the challenge involved a fire dragon, we dismissed the first two lines of the riddle as mere misdirection, just praise for the creature's beauty and size. In truth, those lines hinted at its aerial prowess. The sky is our domain. We ignored them because we thought the obvious answer was enough." Harry smiled, the pieces clicking into place. "So when we mount the dragon and secure that figurine, we'll have completed the riddle and the task." Ginny returned his grin. "All that remains is to convince Hagrid to let us borrow his friend once more, and this time we'll be ready for every fiery clue he's left behind. But to conserve its strength, the fire dragon prefers to stay grounded." Ron gave Ginny a long, assessing look. "Are you really one of the Weasleys?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. "You're far too sharp to be from our family. After all, we Weasleys all, stay on my level." Harry couldn't help a wry smile at Ron's words. He couldn't quite hear the tone in Ron's head, but based on Ron's expression, it sounded utterly ridiculous. Of all 7 Weasley children, Ron was usually the one accused of not being pure enough. Now he was casting doubt on Ginny. Ginny simply rolled her eyes. She'd known her brother long enough to predict his reaction, and she'd even dreamed it beforehand. Hagrid, standing beside them, chuckled softly. He'd been following the whole interchange. "See, Harry, you never guessed? Fortunately, you stumbled onto the secret by accident. Otherwise, you'd have been the very last to know." Harry's eyebrows shot up. "The very last? Does that mean the other champions are already in the loop?" Hagrid shook his head with a grin. "Actually, you're second to last." "The last one is Maxim's student," Hagrid announced, stepping out of the shadows. Ron's eyes went wide. "Isn't your job simply to greet the champions and tell them which dragon they're riding for the individual competition?" Hagrid waved his massive hand dismissively. "Not quite. Besides welcoming the champions, I'm also tasked with arranging a private meet and greet between each champion and their dragon before the contest begins. It gives you a chance to get acquainted and agree on simple signals or instructions. Harry's eyes sparkled with excitement. He pumped his fist. That's brilliant! If the Vila's magic only affects dragons, then we can blindfold ours during the competition and rely on the signals we practice beforehand. So the sooner we discover which dragon will ride and meet with you, the more time we'll have to prepare. That could give us a huge advantage. A heavy silence fell over the little hut. Harry's grin faded as he registered the strange gleam in Hagrid's eyes. The giant's shoulders slumped, and he let out a pitiful sigh. Am I really that useless? Hagrid murmured, rubbing his forehead. I've gone and spilled the secret again. Hagrid's shoulders shook with sobs. I didn't know. The Vila's charm was influencing the dragons, and blindfolding them to feed instructions was never meant to be shared with the competitors. I trusted Quirrell, and I told him the secret of Fluffy. Ginny stepped forward and laid a gentle hand on his arm. Hagrid, we already suspected as much. Even before you told us, Harry and I knew the Vila's beauty could sway dragons. Harry nodded. Exactly, and using blindfolds and whispered directions is hardly a revolutionary tactic. We could have figured that out on our own. Ron punched his palm against his chest in mock indignation. Honestly, when you suggested sending warriors and dragons into the maze, I pictured tying scarves over the dragons' eyes and slipping them orders. Hagrid, you're just worrying too much. Hagrid sniffed, wiping his eyes. I'm sorry. I feel like I've let you all down. Ginny offered him a warm smile. You haven't let us down. You were only trying to keep everyone safe. Harry gave Hagrid's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. We know you meant well, Hagrid. We'll sort this out together. With that, Hagrid managed a small, grateful grin, and the four of them turned away from the ruins, already planning their next move. Chapter 679, The Unconquered Time Loop. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the others had finally persuaded Hagrid to guide them to Lyle, the fierce Hungarian horntail. Yet while Hagrid led the way through the dimly lit corridors, Ryan remained behind, utterly absorbed in his own peculiar form of stress relief. Perched on a cushioned window seat, he cradled Jerry, the plump, marmalade-colored castle cat, against his chest. He couldn't stop cooing as he pressed gentle kisses to Jerry's belly. This pudgy little face is just too irresistible, Ryan murmured. No one else seems to appreciate a chubby kitten, but I do. Here, tiny paws get kisses, those round cheeks get kisses, your soft little tummy needs kisses, even your fuzzy head deserves one. Jerry lay perfectly still, blinking up at Ryan with enormous, unblinking eyes. Nearby, Penello, who apparently considered this entirely ordinary, continued savoring a plate of magically enhanced fried noodles, declaring them even tastier than the best Hogsmeade snack. In fact, Ryan's antics were nothing new. Over the years, castle residents had grown so accustomed to odd spectacles, like Professor Bumblesnape's legendary skirmishes with the so-called four robbers, that teachers would rush in only to dock points, never to truly intervene. So when Ryan hugged Jerry and showered him with gleeful nibbling, neither cat nor bystander batted an eye. Whenever tension mounted, be it from a looming horntail or a time loop paradox, Ryan's instinct was always the same. Find Jerry, pull him close, and smother him with kisses. You might think he'd call on Dr. Hamster Flywheel, his imaginary shrink who could banish distracting thoughts with a stray whisker, but of course, Dr. Flywheel existed only in Ryan's mind. And so, snuggled in the window's warm light, Ryan hugged Jerry a little tighter, ignoring the world rushing past on its inexorable loop. Ryan's ability to calm Jerry was uncanny. When he licked the cat's fur, it was less some bizarre case of Toxoplasma gondii and more a feline instinct springing from pure affection, an almost maternal urge to soothe. Ryan, have you finished with the other vessel in the Hall of Time yet? Penello asked, tilting her head as she watched him lay Jerry gently on the floor. The cat, momentarily placated, patted away on silent paws, still twitching its tail with unspent impatience. Ryan always knew just when to break off, averting Jerry's mischief before it ever truly began. That one? Ryan murmured, craning his neck to study the great mural above them. There, painted on the vaulted ceiling, was an Ouroboros, a perfect, self-sustaining creature with no need for eyes, ears, or limbs, an infinite loop of life consuming itself. Penello nodded, the other vessel of time's power, apart from the temporal converter. Ryan turned back to her. You mean the bell-shaped jar? He said. It contains a cyclical, inexhaustible energy. The founder of the Hall of Time extracted that force from the corpse of Kronos by invoking his true name and sealed it within the jar. That's what makes the container literally unbreakable. Penello's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Then let's retrieve it before anyone else realizes what we're up to. With a shared glance, they set off toward the heart of the hall, where time itself pulsed just beyond reach. Chapter X, The Eternal Pool. I still remember the day we first tested the basin. At a glance, it looked like any shallow pool, its surface rippling with a metallic sheen, but the moment an object from our world touched it, it didn't rest on top. Instead, it sank, as if diving into deep water. Then, under the pool's cyclical force, something impossible happened. The object rewound to its earliest form and replayed its entire developmental history, from primordial beginnings up to its present state. My colleagues whisper that this fluid was harvested from the corpse of a god, an immortal deity somehow slain, its still-living essence repurposed for our research. Whatever the truth, its power is undeniable. We dropped a frog in as our first living test. It didn't dissolve back into eggs. It re-emerged as a tadpole, faithfully retracing its embryonic journey. We were stunned. But the frog was nothing compared to what unfolded on the original world line. A bearded Death Eater, his wand crackling with cursed spells, was chasing Harry, Hermione, and Ron through the ruined halls of what once had been the Black family estate. In the frenzy, he tripped and plunged headfirst into the pool. We watched, horror-struck and fascinated, as his features regressed into infancy, plump cheeks, a single curl of hair. Then, in an instant, aged forward again, sprouting stubble, wrinkles, and finally the familiar rough beard. The cycle completed itself in a heartbeat, leaving him standing as he had been moments before. Whenever I recall that sight, I'm seized by a wave of nausea, and, inexplicably, a dark thrill. The most disturbing moment came when Hermione, in the middle of the chase, suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed, stricken by what appeared to be a severe heart attack. While she lay pale and unmoving, the Death Eater, temporarily reverted to a child by the pool's power, crawled forward and seized Harry's wand-wielding arm. In that frantic instant, predator and prey became something else entirely. One of my colleagues later dubbed him a pig teammate, an unholy ally bound by panic rather than loyalty. The cycle broke when Hermione regained consciousness, the child Death Eater released his grip, and Harry's wand was once again free. But which timeline did we emerge into? The pool's revelations showed us that reality is far more fragile and far more mutable than we ever dared imagine. Hermione whipped around and fixed Harry with a stern glare. "You can't hurt a baby." Lucky for Ryan, Hermione isn't the same person she once was. Ever since she fell under his influence, her whole outlook has shifted. She's come to see the world in his pragmatic hues. So when Voldemort was reduced to an infant, she didn't hesitate or protest with cries of, "But he's still a child." Time in their world is anything but simple. Lately, Ryan has been delving into its deepest mysteries, effectively claiming the mantle of Kronos himself. In every meaningful sense, he has become a god of time. He can slip backward through the ages, branch history off into alternate timelines, or even pause the flow of moments. When he pauses time, he doesn't actually freeze the entire universe. Instead, he inserts a hidden interval, a secret pocket of seconds where only he moves. It's a staggering gift. Yet there's one trick he still cannot master: perfect time loops. If he were to face an opponent far beyond his strength and suffer defeat, he couldn't simply rewind to a safe point and try again until he wins. That sort of cheat, like reloading a saved game, is beyond his reach. Even his most advanced temporal charms can only tweak reality around him. They can't forge an unbroken cycle that guarantees success. In the end, he must confront failure and its consequences rather than erase them with a snap of his fingers. Magic was no mystery to someone like Ryan. He possessed an Ouroboros and thus enjoyed near-infinite regeneration. Even if a colossal amount of magical energy were required, he could simply siphon it off over time in small increments until it all converged at the precise moment he needed it. But that workaround felt contrived. It forced Ryan to remain conscious, constantly overseeing the cycle by sheer willpower. What if he fell unconscious? Worse, what if his very mind ceased to exist? To guarantee absolute victory, Ryan knew he had to unlock a truly self-sustaining time loop, one that would function flawlessly even if he weren't there to guide it. In a sense, the Death God himself was already dead, his personality extinguished long ago. What carried on now were only the vestiges of his original designs, his strategic bias toward his own lineage, his faint concern for the descendants of his two brothers, all lingering traces of human nature. With Ryan's intellect, however, comparable to Dumbledore strategizing against Voldemort, failure was almost inconceivable. Even a 1 in 10,000 chance of collapse was unacceptable. He refused to risk the possibility that the very consciousness driving the time cycle might be snuffed out alongside it. Yet despite all his preparations, a tiny voice in the back of his mind nagged at him. Is any plan ever truly foolproof? And so Ryan's quest continued, searching for that perfect, automatic cycle of time that would eliminate the last sliver of uncertainty once and for all. Penelope frowned at Ryan's blank stare. "What's on your mind?" she asked, shifting to catch his eye. When he didn't answer, she pressed on. "Ryan?" He blinked, as if waking from a dream, and shook his head. "Sorry, I was thinking." His gaze drifted up to the ceiling before he returned it to her. "That energy, the core of Kronos' magic, is unbelievably powerful. If I want to master it, I'd need at least 2 weeks straight without sleep." Penelope's eyebrows shot up. But how did the founder of the Time Hall manage to extract it and store it in that simple, bell-jar vial? Ryan tapped his temple. "In a way, he's like a blood descendant of Kronos himself. He used a ritual of blood resonance to pull the energy out of Kronos' inert, yet still living, body. He can channel that power through the vial, but he couldn't have done it on his own. His personal magic simply isn't strong enough. He had to siphon off holdover power from Kronos. Then, no doubt, he studied it, hoping to elevate himself to the level of our ancient forebears. Of course, that's a fool's errand. Nobody can truly match the originals." Penelope absently traced the rim of the glass container with her fingertip. "So where is Kronos now? Is his body still housed in the Time Hall?" Ryan shrugged. "Strictly speaking, he's everywhere. Kronos isn't bound by a tomb or a coffin. He's the very essence of time. He lives in every tick of a clock, every drop in an hourglass. Once you grasp that, you realize you can't lock him away in any one place." They stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the weight of his words and the challenge of wielding such a cosmic force. "He exists within the very cycle of sunrise and sunset," the scholar explained, his voice resonating through the vaulted hall of time. Leon glanced around at the endless rows of grandfather clocks, sundials, and hourglasses that lined the walls. "No wonder this place is filled with so many ancient timepieces," she said. She paused, absorbing the truth. "These aren't mere decorations. They date back to the era when Kronos' bloodline still thrived. Each device was crafted to observe or even stir the god of time's own essence. By channeling bits of his power, we can study and, when necessary, activate the temporal energies he left behind." With renewed purpose, Leon turned to the central dais, where a single colossal orrery spun in perpetual motion, its gears and spheres a testament to mankind's age-long quest to master time itself. Chapter 680, Ron Gets His Wish. How could an entire family just vanish? Penello pressed, his voice taut with disbelief. He glanced over at Ryan, whose pale, moonlit eyes had narrowed to slits. They passed through the battered walls of Smith Castle, slipping past tangled jungle clearings, tracing winding pathways that threaded ancient ruins and modern spires. As they burrowed deeper beneath the earth, the world above slipped away, leaving only darkness and the echo of their footsteps. At last they emerged on a worn stone landing. Before them stood a solemn archway and a flight of steps hewn from black marble, the entrance to the Hall of Death, 9 floors below the Ministry of Magic in London. Ryan drew back the threadbare curtain. Beyond it lay a silent chamber, lit by flickering sconces. He leaned close to Penello's ear and spoke the name in a low whisper. "Ignotus Peverell." "You mean the Peverells and Nicholas? But they're not immortal." Penello's protest rang out, sharp and incredulous. A shadow of a smile curved Ryan's lips. "Immortality isn't so simple as living forever. It's the blood of our forebears that endures. Generation after generation, their magic courses through our veins. Sooner or later, even a descendant with no overt talent, no wizarding heritage, could serve as a vessel. Then, like a seed long buried, the power would burst forth, and the old gods would walk the earth again. He let the words hang in the hush of the hall. Modern technology would collapse. Muggle society would crumble. Under the supremacy of ancient magic, reality itself could be bent to the will of the strong. It would be paradise for the mighty and hell for the weak. Even I must concede, it was a plan worthy of a true visionary. People? A student in the crowd murmured. Hagrid grinned and ruffled the dragon's bronze spikes. He does see himself as a human being, always has. Harry Potter, descended from Ignotus Peverell, stood nearby with his head bowed, utterly speechless. Before him lay the fearsome Hungarian horntail, now no more ferocious than a playful pup. The creature's bronze-tipped spines wagged back and forth like a dog's tail, gouging shallow trenches in the dusty ground as motes of earth danced in the air. Charlie Weasley shook his head in disbelief. I still can't believe it's the same dragon. Lyle's always been a handful, sneaking up on the other dragoners, squabbling with his siblings. Normally, there were 4 dragon handlers on duty, but with Hagrid involved, they'd become little more than figureheads. Lyle, the horntail, was booked as Charlie's brother-in-law's mount for the next tournament, and Charlie had promised to look after him. In truth, it felt more like a prolonged camping trip than serious dragon tending. Yet under Hagrid's gentle hand, all 4 fire-breathing beasts behaved impeccably. They stayed within the agreed boundary, not a single puff of flame to be seen. And as Harry watched Hagrid tickle Lyle behind the ears, marveling at the dragon's joyful growls, he couldn't help but smile at the unlikely friendship unfolding before him. Dragons have instincts as vital as breathing itself. If they stop breathing, they die. If they don't breathe fire, they simply go without. Hagrid glanced back at Harry as they wound down the trail. You've memorized the way, right? From now on, you can come and see Lyle on your own. I've ordered him to obey you until the end of the next session. Harry lifted his hand in acknowledgement. Across the clearing, the fire dragon Lyle mirrored him, raising a massive bronze-scaled paw. Charlie watched the exchange with a fond smile and let out a soft sigh. Honestly, I'm jealous. I wish I were a dragon warrior like you. Charlie's expression shifted to concern. But where are Ginny and Ron? They're usually right beside you. I heard you all made up again. Harry rested his hand on Lyle's warm, curved horn and replied, They both wanted to ask you something. Ron's fascinated by Dragonclaw powder. He's worried he won't get the chance to buy some when he visits. And Ginny, she's more concerned about keeping proper protocol. She doesn't want to break any dragon-taming rules. Sunday afternoon, in the hidden chamber carved into the mountainside above Hogsmeade, the 7 of them gathered around Hagrid's massive wooden table. According to the rules, only the competitors, and Hagrid himself, were allowed inside. Charlie looked up from the pile of pouches on the table, his thick, scarred forearms flexing as he clenched his fists. Is that something Ron and Ginny get to decide? He demanded. Harry shot a quick glance at Hagrid, who was quietly dabbing at his eyes. He decided not to mention that Hagrid had been fighting back tears all morning. Ron fidgeted with impatience. I've got Dragonclaw powder! I've got Dragonclaw powder! I've got Dragonclaw powder! He chattered, barely able to contain himself. Will you pipe down? Ginny scolded him. Then she turned to Harry, confusion creasing her brow. Harry, why didn't you try to persuade Charlie to cut Ron some slack? Being too lenient only makes Ron worse. Charlie shook his head. Look, the byproducts from these eastern fire dragons, claws, nails, even dung, don't count toward my losses. I'm still within my breeding quota. Professor Sprout comes here every week to collect a few pounds of fresh dragon manure for her greenhouse. You can't beat it as fertilizer. The fresher the better. It needs a little fermenting, just like a fine perfume. Dragon nails too? Ron piped up again, eyes shining. Charlie cracked a grin. Sure, they grow back. No harm to the dragons, and none of it counts against me. Ginny shook her head but couldn't suppress a smile. Even in this secret little stockroom on the edge of Hogsmeade, dragons and their curious charms never failed to draw them all in. This, Harry said with a casual shrug, is one of the hidden perks of being a dragon keeper. Ron's face fell. I should have known. All this time I could have been sipping Dragonclaw powder. Harry rolled his eyes. When a fire dragon lives on a dragon farm, every byproduct belongs to the farm. Sure, Some keepers quietly pocket a few metabolites, but those losses are just written off as handling or transport damage. Get caught swiping them, and you're fined. Only when the farm officially leases the dragon out, when the keeper takes it off-site, do those residues legally become the keeper's property. But even then, a single fire dragon typically has 7 or 8 keepers assigned. Split it equally, and there's almost nothing for each person. And it's rarely divided fairly. Seniority dictates who gets the bulk, sometimes the entire haul. You should count yourself lucky, Ron. If Hagrid hadn't pulled strings, Charlie wouldn't have let you handle a dragon solo. How do you know all that? Ron asked, frowning. You didn't actually interrogate Charlie about it, did you? Harry had a hunch Ron's barrage of questions was aimed at him. Sure enough, when he glanced over, Ron sheepishly nodded. I figured you'd complain, Harry admitted. That's why I pressed so hard about every little detail of that dragon trainer's secret benefit. Ginny grinned and gave a soft clap. Well done, Harry. Ron can be such a hypocrite, always griping without knowing what really matters. Ron cleared his throat and waved a hand, eager to change the subject. Enough about dragons. Let's watch TV. Harry finally got one set up here. All they ever show in the lounge is Bear Grylls' Go Adventure. Don't get me wrong, it's entertaining, but one program on endless loop? Snooze fest. I want Run Auror with Angela Baby. She's stunning. Those long legs when she dashes across the screen. Chef's kiss. Ginny made a face and folded her arms. Gross, Ron Weasley. Last I heard, you had a girlfriend. Neville and Draco spend every weekend doting on theirs. What about you? You just tail after Harry, barging into our sibling time. And now you're daydreaming about... Angela Baby? What kind of name is that? Ron shrugged, grinning. We're wizards, aren't we? We've got Nymphadora Tonks and Draco Malfoy. Not exactly everyday monikers. Ginny rolled her eyes. Exactly. So maybe save the daydreams for someone who cares. With that, she turned back to Harry, leaving Ron to grumble good-naturedly at the new television remote in his hand. Ginny, I know how it sounds, but we're too swayed by Muggle culture. In the wizarding world, those are perfectly ordinary names, Ron said with a grin. He glanced around, added a few more words under his breath, and never once mentioned why he hadn't gone to see Lavender. Instead, he'd hung back with Ginny and Harry like an awkward third wheel. Chapter 268, The Strange Professor Snape. It's so annoying. Why does Snape keep staring at me? Ron muttered under his breath in potions, his lips barely moving. Harry glanced over and saw Ron's eyes flick toward the darkened doorway as if daring the professor to look away. Ron may have struggled with Veritaserum, but when it came to whispering without being heard, he'd become something of an expert, a skill Harry was quietly envious of, especially after seeing how useful it could be in silent casting duels back in 5th year. Today was Monday, January 24th, and potions had been their only class of the morning. With lunch around the corner and no lessons until afternoon, the common room buzzed with chatter about the Triwizard Tournament. Gryffindor would face Ravenclaw in the second task, and both excitement and nerves crackled in the air like sparks from a cauldron. Harry felt a thrill at the thought of seeing his friends compete, but also a knot of worry. Anything could happen when champions faced enchanted obstacles. Ever the stickler for scholarly rigor, Professor Snape showed no sign of easing up just because there was a tournament on the horizon. After dismissing the rest of the class, he stepped forward, his robes sweeping the cold stone floor, and placed a single vial on the lectern. Today, he announced in that silky voice that always set Harry's skin prickling, we begin our study of undetectable poisons. These are toxins for which there is no known antidote, and which elude every standard test. A hush fell. Snape uncorked the vial and held it aloft, the liquid inside shimmering with a sickly sheen. You will learn to recognize their properties by sight, smell, and the slightest change in behavior. Failure to do so could prove catastrophic, on or off the battlefield. Harry leaned forward, heart pounding. Whether he liked it or not, this was the most important lesson of the year, and in Snape's eyes there was no greater danger than ignorance. He paused, then shifted his focus to another class of poisons. Tremendously powerful brews that stood in stark opposition to the virtually undetectable toxins we may never perfect in our lifetimes. His next subject was the death potion, a pitch-black elixir kept in the Magical Congress of the United States Death Row Potion Reservoir. His voice went ice-cold as he outlined the grim execution method used in the 1920s. First, condemned prisoners were marched to death row, where the executioner performed a memory-extracting charm on them. Their happiest recollections, family laughter, childhood triumphs, fleeting moments of love, were drawn out of their minds and cast into the swirling depths of the black potion. Next, the prisoner was seated on an ornate iron chair suspended just above the potion's surface. For one final moment, he could gaze down at those stolen memories dancing in the liquid. Then, silently and inexorably, the chair began to descend. The prisoner, the chair, even the shreds of his past joy slipped beneath the surface and were consumed by the potion's corrosive depths. "This potion doesn't merely kill," the lecturer warned, his tone deadly serious. "It corrodes absolutely everything it touches, flesh, bone, even metal. Wands, shackles, execution chairs all melt away in its presence." A hush fell over the room. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice as he prepared to move on. "From here, we come to the most infamous case of all, the Potion Killer." Chapter 7. The Water Gun Assassin. Nocturne Alley had always been a refuge for wizards who dealt in the darker arts, unlicensed potioners, hex merchants, and black market broom collectors. When Brandon O'Sullivan arrived one damp autumn evening, he blended seamlessly into this clandestine crowd. A thin, sallow-faced Irishman with a mop of unruly red hair, he wore threadbare robes and kept his head down. Rumor had it he was homeschooled, an oddity from County Kerry, who showed up in Diagon Alley only to disappear into Nocturne's winding alleyways. There he set himself up as a modest vendor of simple brews, draughts of sleep-inducing Poppet's Lullaby, a vial of Forgetfulness draught, or the occasional Love Infatuation tincture. Nothing that raised eyebrows. Yet within weeks, bodies began to pile up. First, it was Maddock Folly, a goblin dealer with a reputation for cruelty. Then came Serena Keyworth, a curse-breaker who specialized in dragonfire wards. Each corpse was found with a single gruesome hallmark. The heart, or in some cases the skull, had been utterly eaten away, as though some invisible acid had dissolved it. No scorch marks, no puncture wounds, only a neat, polished hole where bone or muscle should have been. Local wizards whispered of new black magic, perhaps an ancient runespore spell resurfaced. Aurors were dispatched, led by the stern, silver-haired Alastair Vaughan. He combed through the alley night after night, questioning fence-keepers and crypt owners, chasing rumors of a shadowy assassin. But every clue led to a dead end. Every suspect had an alibi, and nothing pointed to organized dark witches or wizards. All suspicion avoided Brandon, whose private workshop reeked of failed experiments. He brewed in secrecy, muttering to himself over bubbling cauldrons that most alchemists thought unstable. Whatever he was concocting, it never worked. If anything, he appeared more of a harmless eccentric than a lethal threat. That illusion shattered when another victim was discovered in a deserted stables behind the alley. The body, Eamon Kilbride, a smuggler of contraband wands, lay face down in straw. His heart cavity was cleanly severed and gone. But pinned to his robes with a single ornate silver clasp was a tiny pendant, no larger than a dragon's egg. Made of fairy silver, it should have been impervious to any mundane acid or potion. Instead, the edges were darkened, stained with a viscous black residue. Aurors retrieved the pendant and brought it to the Ministry's Department of Mysteries for analysis. Experts tested every known corrosive curse and acid-based charm. Nothing matched the black fluid. It wasn't the residue of Avada Kedavra, nor any variation of Sectum Sempra. Desperate, they called on Professor Leister, the Ministry's potions master. Over long nights in his lab, Leister ran titration tests, crystalline chromatography, magical spectrometry, until finally the impossible became clear. The residue was neither curse nor standard potion, but an entirely new formula, one so potent it could disintegrate flesh and bone almost instantly. And the medium of delivery? Not a wand at all, but a modified Muggle water gun, crafted from a rare, non-corrosive copper alloy and lined with goblin-forged steel. The bullet was a single, pressurized shot of death potion. Now, suspicion zeroed in on the quiet Irishman who sold oddball brews under the flickering lanterns of Nocturne Alley. A man with average magical skill, hardly the type to concoct such a weapon, yet somehow he had. Brandon O'Sullivan had been hiding in plain sight, an assassin armed with a Muggle device and a lethal dose of an unknown concoction, and until the Ministry unraveled his secret, no one knew who would fall next. The Aurors finally caught their break in the potion killer case by tracing all the unusual ingredient orders back to a single purchaser. News of the arrest spread quickly through the magical community, and not least because the case was featured in the most recent issue of Practical Potions Master. In his article, Master Leicester reproduced key portions of the killer's recipe, noting with genuine regret that, had this individual received a Hogwarts education, he might have made a remarkable potioneer. Leicester's words set off a firestorm among potion experts around the globe. Across the Atlantic, Macusa's own brewers took notice. A handful of American potionists recognized striking similarities between the killer's formula and the secret death potion the Ministry had been reserving for executions. After an exhaustive investigation, they confirmed what they'd feared all along. The black draught concocted by the potion Erderer was indistinguishable from Macusa's death potion. In response, American authorities quietly removed that method from their execution protocols. Back at Hogwarts, Ron spent the day scowling over the article. Harry suspected that Snape, ever the meticulous academic, had even compared corrosion marks on a victim's heart and circulated photographic evidence among his peers. It was hard not to draw a connection between that and the rumor that Severus himself might be the potion killer. Ron, rattled by the implication, finally voiced his objection at dinner. "I can't believe Snape would stoop so low." Harry listened, mildly amused. Ron wasn't bragging, he was simply bewildered. After all, Snape's harshest lessons were often born of concern for his students. Harry could only shrug, but certain that his professor's true motives would come to light in time. Harry scarcely took his eyes off Professor Snape throughout the entire lesson, watching his every precise movement and mentally filing away compliments he might offer later. Beside him, Ron's habitual daydreaming made him an easy target for Snape's disdain, and it seemed only a matter of time before the professor's sharp tongue snapped at him. Sure enough, when potions class ended, Snape dropped a handout about several undetectable poisons on their desks. Ron peered at it, scowling. "What's this?" I followed the part about the death potion, but I must have nodded off when he explained these undetectable poisons. What are they? Harry hid a triumphant smile and tilted his head in mock sympathy. Then, checking over his shoulder to make sure Snape wasn't watching, he spoke evenly. "You did hear him list a few examples, didn't you? That's exactly what we need to learn today. He isn't giving us step-by-step brewing instructions, just a broad classification. It's so none of us accidentally kills a friend. He wants us to study the categories on the handout, and then he'll quiz us on them next class." Ron blew out a frustrated breath. "But the chapter, wasn't it still going? I thought there was more." "It is," Harry agreed. "He told us to turn to the next page and finish reading. Obviously, the worksheet ties directly into the rest of the chapter. All that extra chatter about the death potion was just context. And don't forget, we've got that pudding cup competition this afternoon. Better brush up on this before we go." Harry couldn't help but notice that none of us were really paying attention to the lesson. By the end of class, even Harry was surprised. When had Professor Snape become so relaxed? He'd never before cut us any slack. Snape demanded that we practice our potions to perfection, watched our every move, and never hesitated to single out non-Slytherins for a public dressing down. To some Ravenclaws, he still had a reputation as a brilliant teacher. Harsh, but effective. Today, however, he'd done something completely out of character. He actually told us a story. Granted, it was a story about potion making, sprinkled with useful facts and techniques, but compared to the rigorous drills he usually imposed, it felt lazy. Even the snippets of praise he awarded Harry were fewer in number and sounded oddly formulaic, almost as if he'd recycled them from a textbook. Harry could swear the phrasing was familiar, though he couldn't quite place why. "Do you think Snape's busy?" Harry wondered aloud as he walked alongside Hannah toward the potions classroom. He knew she was the one to ask. She seemed to know every bit of gossip floating around Hogwarts. With a skeptical glance at the stone corridor ahead, Harry braced himself for whatever rumor might explain Snape's uncharacteristic leniency. Hannah, who'd been chatting and laughing with Neville and Susan Bones, suddenly turned to Harry. Me? You want to ask me, Harry? Her small face burned with excitement at the very mention of the professor's private life, her eyes sparkling. She darted a quick look around to make sure Professor Snape wasn't within earshot, then leaned forward conspiratorially. I know a lot about Professor Sen. Ape, she hissed. Thanks to Taishi Yumiksu for the monthly ticket and to all my classmates for their recommendations and support. Chapter 269. I want both. Harry leaned forward, curiosity burning in his eyes as Hannah launched into her latest stream of gossip about Professor Snape. He was an undercover Death Eater in his youth, so deep cover that even the other professors thought he'd gone over to the dark side, she began. He even broke up with his girlfriend because of it. I know all that, Harry said impatiently. Come on, something new. Hannah shrugged dramatically. Fine, he never washes his robes, claims it ruins the potion residue. Worse than Rocky, our house's notorious crybaby who showers once a month. Harry raised an eyebrow. That bad, huh? Believe it. And did you hear about Professor Sprout? She's been borrowing gillyweed from Snape's private stores as compost for her greenhouse. I've heard the whispers. Good. He also refuses to use shampoo, just rinses his hair in hot water, says the caustic potion dust makes his locks stronger. Harry bit his lip. Okay, and? Late at night, he's been sneaking into the Forbidden Forest to harvest unicorn hair, moonlit dew, and other rare ingredients. Harry exhaled slowly. That's a lot of midnight strolls. Hannah leaned in, lowering her voice. And, brace yourself, he's keeping a colony of feral fairies in that drafty old office of his. Sprout says they're dangerously territorial if you get too close. Harry rubbed his temples. That's enough. I'm craving the gossip, but what I really need to know is how busy he's been recently. Anything that hints at what's actually taking up his time. Hannah tugged at her braids, rolling her eyes. If you want the real scoop, check the Daily Prophet. He's been featured almost every other day this month, speaking at conferences, signing new research contracts, giving interviews. If he's swamped, it must be because of that. Harry nodded, satisfied. At least now he had something concrete to follow up on. Snape's sudden flurry of public appearances. Whatever was behind it, it was bound to be far more significant than whether he shampooed or not. Neville hurried over to Harry's side, a hopeful grin lighting up his face. Hey Harry, do you mind if I take Hannah off for a bit? Harry saw the excitement on Hannah's cheeks. Neville must have just shared the latest bit of gossip. He felt a twinge of irritation. If he hadn't been keeping a low profile all term, he'd easily be the most talked-about student at Hogwarts. Be my guest, Harry said with a shrug. Neville beamed triumphantly and led Hannah out of the classroom. Ron dropped an arm over Harry's shoulder and shot him an exasperated look. You see what I mean? Neville's practically glued to his girlfriend, doesn't even notice his friends anymore. Before Harry could retort, Ginny slipped through the doorway, quietly closing it behind her. Harry glanced at the hourglass-shaped clock on the wall and realized they'd lost track of time. He was supposed to meet Ginny in the auditorium as soon as classes let out. Ron leaned in, eyebrows raised. So, what was that about? Nothing, Harry mumbled, trying to sound casual. Nothing, Ron echoed with a smirk. Come on, when was the last time you and Lavender had a moment alone? You wouldn't be breaking up? Heat rose in Harry's cheeks. He shuffled a few steps back and ducked behind Ginny's shoulder. We did not break up. Ginny stifled a giggle while Ron looked on, feigning shock. Really? You two broke up? Harry, mate? Harry shot Ron a withering glare. No, we didn't. End of story. With that settled, Ginny slipped an arm through Harry's and steered him toward the door. Ron followed, still shaking his head in amused disbelief, as the three of them left the classroom for whatever Hogwarts or Lavender had in store next. Ron hung his head, his two index fingers nervously poking at one another. I'm trying to get a grip, he muttered, voice low. And Ginny, you don't know what it's like. Some mornings I wake up and stare at myself in the mirror thinking, is that really me? Seeing myself, as a girl, being engaged to Harry, it feels so Nay. Ginny's eyes narrowed. She stepped between Ron and Harry, her voice fierce. You're overreacting. You're still Ron Weasley. Guy or girl, you haven't changed who you are inside. You like girls. You're the biggest Chudley Cannons fan we know, and you've been dating Lavender Brown for ages. You can't just flip-flop your entire life because your body feels different." Harry's face drained of color. Ginny turned back to Ron. "And let's be clear, whether you call yourself Ginny or Gimli, you're the sixth Weasley, and I'm Harry's sister. He's in love with me, not this. I thought you were on your way back to normal." Without another word, Ginny grabbed Harry's sleeve and tugged him toward the door, leaving Ron standing alone, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Once they were in the hallway heading for the Great Hall, Harry glanced anxiously at his sister. "Ginny, don't be too hard on him. He's going through something huge. This isn't just a bad hair day. Let's give Ron some time. He'll find his feet again, I promise." Ginny came to a halt and rolled her eyes. "Say it like you mean it, Harry." Harry paused, meeting her gaze. He'd spent days, maybe nights, lingering in Voldemort's mind, dueling Bellatrix in their shared dreamscape from sunrise to sunset. He was used to shifting battlefields and borrowed powers, but something fundamental had shifted within him. Finally, he spoke. "Don't you understand? I'm on your side. I always have been. When I dropped the Ginley persona so quickly, it wasn't because my feelings for you changed. I made a conscious choice to separate those parts of myself. I wanted to be purely Harry, because that's who I'm supposed to be. In doing so, I must have skimmed over everything Ginley cared about: Wizard's chess, the Chudley Cannons, Aunt Muriel's sharp tongue, even Madame Rosmerta's gossip sessions. But Ron, he couldn't do that. For him, stepping into the Luon identity was the only way to admit how much he loves you. Didn't you notice how he's been avoiding anything connected to being Ron? You thought he moved to a different bed just to put distance between you. No, he shifted because that's where Rowan, the other me, sleeps in the girls' dormitory. Didn't it strike you? It's been ages since he set up a wizard's chessboard. He hasn't crafted a single smoke bomb in weeks. Even his voice has changed. How could you not notice?" Harry's words hung in the cool corridor air, and Ginny, caught off guard, could only stare. For the first time, she saw not two rival identities warring inside him, but a single heart trying to set things right. Ginny's eyes narrowed. "I know that was unmistakably my voice. He nearly convinced himself he was Ron, and on purpose. Do you think I should call him out on it?" Harry hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I doubt it'll do much good, but how about we run a little test? Invite him over and ask him to brew a smoke bomb, see if he's still as fast as he used to be. When I woke up this morning, I realized I could still make one using that emotional override charm, though I lost the ability when I anchored my own self-awareness. He may have learned my bat spirit incantation by now." Ginny's face lit up. "Exactly. Remember the night we finally patched things up? He created a smoke bomb without even drawing his wand. If he's achieved that level of mastery, it means he's fully anchored his self-cognition." Harry blinked. "Anchored his self-cognition? You're saying he actually fell in love with you while convinced he was Ron? That would be even worse." Ginny spun around, her brow furrowed in thought. "Wait, I'm still me, Ginny Weasley, and that means I've just pinpointed the real twist in all this. That smoke bomb. No, that mist spell. He poured every last bit of Ron into it. Driven by those fierce, desperate feelings, the magic broke free. I wouldn't be surprised if he still sneaks off to inhale its lingering essence." Harry's eyes snapped shut. His mind raced back to that late-night moment when Ron was brewing the smoke bomb. Through the swirling mist, a figure had flickered. He'd simply assumed it was Ron. Now, though, the memory felt off. The hair had been too long, too silky, the facial features too soft, the skin unnaturally pale. It wasn't just Ron, it was the perfect dreamy Ron that both Ginny and Ron had imagined getting engaged to. "Of course," Ginny murmured, reading the truth in Harry's expression. She pressed a hand to her forehead, pain flickering behind her eyes. "It means Ron chose a different path from mine. He didn't reject himself, but he also embraced this idealized Ron. He wanted both versions." Harry reached out, gently taking her hand. He met her uncertain gaze. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe all he really wants is to stay by my side as Ron, quietly setting aside his own turmoil to support us both." Chapter 270. Quidditch Stadium in the Clouds. It was exactly 4 o'clock when students and judges alike filled the auditorium, chattering excitedly under the enchanted ceiling that had cleared from slate gray to bright blue. At the staff table, Professor Dumbledore stood, and the room instantly fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm yet carrying to every corner of the hall, "in 5 minutes I will invite you all to the Quidditch Stadium to witness the team competition, the second event of our Final Four. The pitch is fully prepared, complete with the facilities we'll use again for the individual contest on the 24th of next month. But first, I'd like to ask the rest of our judging panel to join me." A ripple of applause accompanied the rise of Victor Karkaroff, Arthur Weasley, Madge Maxim, and Professor Volcanova as they made their way down the aisle and out the doors. Cheers followed them, eager anticipation already crackling in the air. Harry glanced toward Ron, who was seated a little farther down next to Terry Boot. Before he could say anything, Neville Longbottom cleared his throat. "Harry? Ron?" Neville began hesitantly, then shrank back under their amused looks. Ginny Weasley, sitting just behind them, leaned forward. "Come on, you two. Let's talk about our strategy for the match." Harry exchanged a quick, determined nod with Ron. Neville, his courage faltering, took a step back but lingered nearby. After a thoughtful pause, he piped up again. "All right, so what exactly is our plan for the team competition?" As the final judges disappeared beyond the auditorium doors, the question hung in the charged air, signaling the start of what promised to be the most thrilling event yet. Every day, the workshops churn out fabrics, leathers, metals, and other raw materials. Everything we handle is ultimately destined to become a competition uniform. In truth, the team contest isn't about fashion or flair so much as it is a test of endurance. Who can craft the sturdiest, most reliably enchanted gear? When you think about it, our alchemy class carries 99% of the workload. The remaining 1%, assembling the pieces, barely seems worth fussing over. Why bother marching out to the stadium at all? "Maybe that final assembly is the real spectacle," Harry ventured. "That's when our skills will matter. By the time the uniforms are finished, I bet the interplay of light and shadow from the enchantments will look amazing." There wasn't time to debate further. 5 minutes vanished in a heartbeat. Rising from his seat, Professor Dumbledore led the faculty and students out of the Great Hall in perfect formation. They emerged onto the Quidditch pitch, or what had once been the pitch. The familiar grass was gone, replaced by a shifting cloud-like surface. Each step felt impossibly soft, as though the ground itself were a giant spring mattress, giving way beneath their feet before bouncing them gently back up. Dumbledore and the 4 other referees climbed the side stairs into the stadium and then, quite suddenly, reappeared on the Quidditch pitch. They walked in a neat line to the very center of the arena. With a graceful flick of his wand aimed at the ground, Dumbledore set off a silvery ripple at his feet. In an instant, white, cloud-like cushions burst outward, spreading quickly until they formed an irregular circle around the 5 officials. A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Before anyone could react further, the cushions lifted the referees clean off their feet and launched them skyward. But that was only the beginning. As Dumbledore and his team drifted upward, a tremor ran through the stands. "What's happening?" students shouted. "The ground is shaking. We're rising off the ground." Suddenly, it became clear. The growing mats beneath the referees were linked by an invisible magic to similar cushions tucked under every row of seats. As the central cushions climbed, so did the entire stadium, lifting hundreds of fans into the chilly air. For 10 minutes, the stand, DS, hovered, suspended well above the pitch. The higher they rose, the colder the breeze became, but nobody seemed to mind. Students leapt to their feet, cheering and laughing at the thrill of flight. Below them, the Quidditch pitch grew smaller and wilder with excitement as Hogwarts' first airborne match was officially underway. Some of the spectators were lucky enough to find themselves wreathed in drifting clouds. Fun to breathe in at first, until the condensation turned into a coughing fit that left them spitting mist. The students in the lower rows leaned forward anxiously, trying to peer down through the fog, but all they could make out were the cloud-like blankets shrouding the ground far below. Only those seated higher up had a clear view. Hogwarts itself was reduced to a thumbnail in the distance. The entire Forbidden Forest fanned out like a dark tapestry around it. Below them, The black lake gleamed like a polished lens under the sun. At its far edge, the famed Ktrubshi redwood rose crimson and proud, and drifting in the center of the water was Durmstrang's grand ship, its hull rocking ever so gently. On the high platform, usually reserved for commentators, the professors were just as captivated as the students. Professor McGonagall stood rigid, her arms raised as though held aloft by some unseen partner, while Professor Flitwick murmured a quick charm to thicken the soles of his shoes until the ground felt steady beneath him. Along the irregular ring of the pitch, the referees remained perfectly still and silent, watching the display of wonder and excitement spill over among the students and staff. It was as if they were waiting for this collective outpouring of emotion to subside before the match could truly begin. Time seemed to stretch on. Minutes felt like hours, before a hush finally settled over the enchanted stadium. Maxim stepped forward, tapping his wand lightly against the lectern. "I know you're all eager to learn how the team competition will be scored," he began. "After all, you've already completed the primary material processing task. As I mentioned back in our very first alchemy lecture, I'm keeping a tally of every piece of silk each school has refined, divided, of course, by the number of participants. But today's contest isn't limited to silk alone. We've also tracked every qualifying piece of leather, metal fittings, and other fabrics you needed to craft the perfect game uniform." He paused to let that sink in. "Each finished item from every school has been counted and averaged per student. Then, for each category, silk, leather, metal, and fabric, we've awarded points. 4 points for first place, 3 for second, 2 for third, and 1 for fourth. After crunching the numbers, here are the overall standings." With a flick of his wand, the results glowed in midair. 1. Beauxbatons Academy. 2. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 3. Kastrubsha Technical Institute. 4. Durmstrang Institute. A murmur rippled through the assembled students, pride on some faces, disappointment on others. Maxim raised his hand for silence. "These rankings will determine the order in which each team activates the Scott transformation spell later today." "Yes, you heard that right. So prepare yourselves. Your place in line has just been decided." "All right, everyone, listen up. Before we blend the components you perfected in our last alchemy class, we first need to harmonize the magical signatures embedded in each ingredient. To accomplish that, I've temporarily transformed the entire Quidditch pitch into one enormous Scots cauldron. If you look at the desk in front of you, you'll see a hand-shaped indentation. Those of you in the first row will find it on the railing directly before you. At the appointed time, simply press your hand into the mark. Mr. Weasley will then guide you through the steps of steering the cauldron, allowing you to merge the distinct magics of your materials into a single, unified essence. Because we're mixing things up a bit, the order this time is reversed. The lowest rank, Ed School, will go first, and each higher-ranked team may observe the groups that preceded them. One final note. The quality of your harmonized blend will not affect your house's score directly. However, it will have a tangible impact on the final enchantment of your house Quidditch uniform. Mrs. Maxim paused, surveying her students. At that moment, Professor Dumbledore rose from his seat in the stands, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a knowing grin. "Now," he said, raising his wand, "I'm about to cast a spell. Perhaps you'd like to guess which one." With that, he pointed his wand toward the castle, and a hush fell over the crowd. The chatter in the stands swelled as students debated Mrs. Maxim's last clue. 10 seconds later, someone near the railing pointed and cried, "Look!" 4 loud whooshes cut through the air as massive wooden crates, each bearing a different school crest, soared over the spectators. They streaked onto the field and settled gently on the cloud-like surface below. Seizing the moment, Mr. Weasley amplified his voice with a quick charm. "The answer is clearly the flying charm. But we're on a tight schedule, and I see a few of you shivering from the cold. So let's proceed. Durmstrang students, please step forward and place your dominant hand on the mark." Chapter 684. The team competition ends abruptly. An emblem, its double-headed eagle and stag's head framed by Cyrillic letters, flared to life, glowing a deep orange red the moment Mr. Weasley spoke the activation phrase. With an almost imperceptible click, the wooden box before them swung open on its own hinges. From inside, the The ingredients the students had painstakingly prepared in their alchemy lessons over the last few months lifted into the air, drifting down to rest on the cloud-like surface of the arena floor. On the raised platform, the Durmstrang contestants stepped forward in unison and pressed their palms to the sigil etched into the ground. A low hum resonated through the stadium as slender lines of gold traced themselves outward from each touchpoint, weaving together into a grand circular array. Within its perimeter, two smaller concentric rings formed, intersected by three irregular five-pointed stars and bracketed by two triangles, an intricate alchemical diagram derived from Scott's transmutation spell, now transcribed into arcane runes. No sooner had the last line etched itself into place than the piled reagents began to glow, each material radiating its own colored halo. Crackling arcs of electrical energy leaped between the halos, setting off a dazzling show of sparks. One by one, the different magic fields collided and intertwined, merging into a single, roiling display of power. Across the stadium, students from the other schools sat up straighter, sweat beading on their brows. They understood all too well what they were witnessing. Under Headmaster Karkaroff's stern direction, the Durmstrang champions were demonstrating an unflinching, and by all accounts, ruthless command of alchemical magic. Even Crumb, scarcely known for timidity, looked uneasy at the raw force unfolding before him. The contest, it seemed, was not only about skill, but also about who was willing to wield power with the fewest scruples, and Durmstrang had just raised the bar. In the last match, when we pooled our magic to bless Victor Krumm's gear, we deliberately held back the full strength of the enchantment. This time, though, our school's dragon riding team, whose very uniforms served as the raw material for the ritual, was gathered around the alchemy array. Harry was among them, sleeves rolled up and wand at the ready. He couldn't shake his unease. In the next round, the riders would be hurtled through the sky on dragonback, risking frequent and potentially deadly falls from dizzying heights. Without the safety net of a powerful group blessing, a top-notch uniform bristling with protective spells was their only hope. One misstep, one unexpected slip, and even a well-timed cushioning charm or deceleration hex might not save you from life-threatening injuries. "Harry, look at Karkaroff," Ginny whispered, leaning close. She'd spotted the same thing he had been dreading. Harry turned, severely arched brows, tightly clenched jaw, and saw Igor Karkaroff's face drawn tight with anxiety. He shifted his gaze back to the magical array before them. The familiar crackle of raw power still filled the air, but the flashes were growing more refined, less chaotic. The overlapping rings of enchantment around the workbench were losing their random brilliance and melting into a single steady glow. The uniform's fabric, woven with dragon hide and enchanted thread, lay spread beneath the array, waiting to be bound together by the final surge of collective magic. Harry inhaled slowly. No matter how much the others feared the unanswered dangers of high-altitude combat, they were all here, united by a single goal, to give their riders the best possible protection. As the halo of light coalesced, he gripped his wand with determination. In a moment, they'd channel every ounce of their power into these uniforms and into the safety of their friends. How could this happen? Harry wondered, even as a smile tugged at his lips. He was pleased by the outcome, but he couldn't shake the question. Why had the Durmstrang students all turned so subdued? Sensing his say on fusion, Neville leaned over and whispered, "I noticed it too. After Victor Krumm won the first individual contest, they all looked down, ashamed. And that order to hold him back? It wasn't Grindelwald's doing at all. It came from Karkaroff himself. They've finally realized their mistake and are taking it seriously." Harry nodded. Neville's explanation made sense, and there didn't seem to be any better answer. He'd have to ask Krumm about it later. Meanwhile, 10 minutes passed in silence, the glowing halos above the enchanted parchments gradually melding into a steady, neutral gray. When the last tendrils of color blended, Mr. Weasley tapped his wand decisively against his desk. "Time's up," he announced, but oddly he made no move to record any scores for the Durmstrang submissions. With a graceful flick, he sent the parchment swirling back into an ornate wooden box at his side. The box's copper clasp, engraved with a bold C, shimmered briefly before it sprang open and released a fresh stack of documents. Now, let's see what the students from Castrobs have prepared, he said, scanning the new entries. One by one, the sheets rose into the air, and their magic halos coalesced into a uniform dark gray. Satisfied, Mr. Weasley signaled the end of that round. Then, turning to the Hogwarts materials, he summoned them forth. 4 silvery figures, a lion, a raven, a badger, and a snake, whirled into formation around a gleaming H. Their combined glow deepened into an inky black as the next stage of the competition began. 2 golden, cross-shaped wands, each set with 3 gleaming stars, suddenly flared to life. At the same instant, the swirling magical aura around the Beauxbatons materials coalesced into a deep, inky black, marking the close of the team competition. Standing atop the floating, irregularly shaped platform, Mr. Rack Weasley raised his hand. Very good, everyone. That concludes today's event. A ripple of surprised chatter swept through the stands. Wait, already over? No scores posted? How is this different from the usual team challenge? Aren't the uniforms supposed to be made on the spot? So we won't see them until the 24th? The questions died down as Mr. Weasley held up his wand for attention. You're correct. The team phase is finished, and no scores will be displayed today. This challenge wasn't a standard group magic trial, but an alchemy competition. You've all been practicing alchemy every Saturday, accumulating points as you go. Now, instead of tallying those points publicly, your creations will be used directly to craft the warriors' uniforms. He paused to let that sink in. Those uniforms are crucial for next month's individual competition. While we can't reveal the final garments just yet, I can give you a sneak peek. I suspect some of you have already guessed what's in store. Headmaster Dumbledore raised his hand for silence. For the individual Quidditch trials on the 24th of next month, you'll notice a few changes to the pitch. Our next match will be played high in the sky, just as it appears now, and we will no longer provide group enchantments to bolster your players. You may bring nothing but your uniform, your wand, and one undisclosed item. With a gentle flick of his wand, the cloud-like platform beneath everyone's feet began to drift downward. The pale, misty terrace at the center of the field, and the stands attached to it, sank in perfect unison. 15 minutes later, the entire Quidditch arena, Dumbledore included, touched down softly on solid ground. The spectators felt the reassuring firmness beneath their feet and murmured among themselves. Once the descent was complete, the students filed out of the stands by house and by school. Neville Longbottom gave Harry a quick wave, then hurried off to join Hannah over in the Hufflepuff section. It was astonishing how useless the officiating team had been today. At least Dumbledore, Ron's father, and Madame Maxime had managed a few protective spells and offered calming words. Karkaroff and Mrs. Volkanova, on the other hand, did nothing beyond ushering their students off the field in an orderly fashion. Really, you could have swapped them out for Castor Pollock, Dumbledore's dark doppelganger, just as easily as you'd replace Castrobusher. Ron, you, Harry began, turning toward his friend, half surprised and half confused. But Ginny was already there, playfully pinching Harry's neck and speaking just loudly enough for Ron to hear. She rolled her eyes. Sounds familiar. I saw you squirm. No snarky comments from Ron, okay? You bored? Bored? Harry shook his head, a small smile on his lips. Bored? With you, I've got the whole world. He dropped his voice into a soft, husky whisper, words intimate enough that Ron, chatting with his own partner nearby, couldn't help overhearing. In that charged moment, Harry realized the truth. If he finally admitted how he felt, he and Ginny would be right back where they'd been before the breakup. Chapter 272, The Baby in the Dream. Roaring waves and jagged, ice-choked rapids battered the shores of a lonely island in another dimension. At its heart rose a solitary fortress, its rough-hewn stones slick with spray. Inside one of its cold, torchlit halls, a fierce argument erupted. A tall, gaunt man paced before a woman whose bearing was the very portrait of haughty nobility, though her threadbare rags and sweat-streaked face betrayed her desperate situation. She held herself as though draped in royal finery, her long lashes casting arrogant shadows over sharp, disdainful eyes. "I won't allow it," the man snapped, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He ran a trembling hand through his disheveled hair. "I refuse to let you do this. She is my child. If the Dark Lord knew, if he understood what she means to our cause, He would bless her without hesitation. She was born in the promised land, the very cradle from which our Lord will rise again to conquer the world. The woman's lips curled into a mocking smile. She stepped forward, leaning casually against a rough-hewn pillar. "Your child?" she repeated, her tone laced with scorn. "Are you really so certain of that? Do you still remember the fish?" she asked, her voice low. He went pale. "You know?" he ground out through clenched teeth. "But that child, that's Lestrange's offspring." Her eyes glittered with a sudden memory. "You're wrong. The two of you weren't alone back then. There were three of us." At her words, he straightened, jaw set, finally meeting her gaze head-on. He sounded more to himself than to her as he ran through possibilities. Three? Certainly not Travers, always pining after Crouch Jr., and the Mulcibers, father and son, nasty pair, obsessed with imperious curses and total obedience. No, it can't be them. This is little Crouch? She lifted an eyebrow at his first show of confidence, a mocking smile curling her lips. "Oh, bravo! So it's him!" He ignored her amusement and muttered, more to himself than to her. "No, that can't be right. Those massive jaw muscles? They could only have come from a Lestrange." The woman sneered. "Are you sure she still hasn't cut a tooth?" The tall man slammed his fist on the bench and looked toward the barred door. "Rabastan, hurry! Bring the child here!" "In a moment, brother," came a hesitant voice from outside. The door creaked open, and a short, portly man slipped into the cell, cradling a chubby baby girl who was contentedly sucking her fist. He moved with exaggerated care, as if the infant might burst at the slightest misstep. The woman laughed. "So, you think the brat's yours?" Rabastan lowered his head without answering, his eyes softening as he admired the child. Then, in a low voice, he warned, "Quiet down. There are only 7 of us in this wing, each locked in their own cell. If the Traverses or the Mulcibers overhear us, they're nothing but lechers. God knows what they'd do." From the opposite bench, the gaunt man spoke at last, his tone colder than the wind howling outside. "She is my wife, Rabastan," he said quietly. "Mind your manners. She's your sister-in-law. Now hand me the child." The shorter, stouter brother trembled at the tall man's words. Reluctantly, he glanced at Bella and the infant cradled in her arms, both clad in threadbare garments, and then carefully lifted the child to pass her into his taller sibling's waiting arms. The leaner man held the baby gently against his chest. Brushing the only clean spot on his tattered coat with his fingertips, he let his hand drift to the child's chin, cradling it as though anchoring himself to this fragile moment. He drew in a long, steadying breath. Just as his brother's hand twitched forward, perhaps to reclaim the child or to protest, the tall man met his gaze. "She is my daughter," he said softly. "It won't be long now. She'll wake soon, hungry for milk." The shorter brother stilled, then nodded. Together, they left the room, closing the door behind them. The tall man laid the baby on a makeshift cradle of hay and mouse pelts set in the room's warmest corner, right beside Bella. "Don't forget to feed her soon," he reminded her gently. Once they were gone, Bella turned on her side and watched the infant's chest rise and fall with each soft breath. At last, her eyes softened. "You truly are their child. No, my child," she whispered. "And yet, what a cruel world you've been born into." "My lord will be resurrected soon," Bella whispered, her voice trembling with both anticipation and fear. Harry found himself watching from somewhere between sleep and waking. The scene unfolded in Ravenclaw Tower, Hogwarts, the dormitory's 4-poster bed bathed in moonlight. Bella's eyes, usually so composed, now shone with desperate longing and a girlish shyness Harry knew all too well from the dreams that haunted him. A pale, wide-eyed infant lay swaddled against the pillows. Bella's slender fingers hovered over the baby's throat, knuckles white with tension. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I can't let you live. The master's slave cannot." Her hand began to descend. Then Harry awoke with a start, sitting bolt upright in his own room, high in a Scottish Highland tower. "Don't!" he cried into the darkness. In that moment, something deep within him stirred. The dormant phoenix magic that had long slumbered in his veins flared to life for the first time. A piercing, ethereal cry rose up from his soul as a swirl of crimson flame gathered around his outstretched right hand. He snapped his fingers. Far away, in the grim confines of Azkaban, a wailing infant was suddenly wrapped in an invisible, fiery wind. The castle's cold stones echoed with a crack that sounded like breaking chains, and then the baby was gone. Harry pressed a trembling palm to his chest, feeling the fading warmth of the magic pulse beneath his skin. He had saved her, but from where had he taken her? And what new dangers lay ahead for the child he had rescued by the power of the Phoenix? Chapter 6. She bolted upright in the darkness, her fingers curling instinctively at her sides. For a moment, the gale that had rattled the very air around her ceased, and a wild, dissonant laugh tore from her throat, harsh and chilling, uncannily like the Dark Lord's own mirth. Ha ha ha! In that instant, she felt Voldemort's power, as vast and terrible as a storm, fold around her. The fractured skies of that uncanny dimension quivered and merged into one blazing channel. An overwhelming realization struck her. Apparition. Just as she had always known her daughter would, the teleportation surged to life. Magic curled about her limbs, wrenching her away from the island. In a heartbeat, she was gone, carried across miles of night toward the ancient towers and ghostly ramparts of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Gone forever. In the Gryffindor dormitory at Hogwarts, Harry Potter woke with a strangled cry. His nightshirt clung to his skin in sweaty tangles, and an inexplicable pressure pressed against his belly, as if something living stirred just beneath his ribs. His heart hammered as distant voices broke the silence. "Harry? Wake up! What's wrong?" Ron Weasley blinked against the dim glow of a floating candle, voice heavy with concern. He swung his legs over the edge of his bed and hurried forward. "Did you have a nightmare?" Anthony Goldstein was on his feet beside Ron in an instant. "You're shaking. Are you all right, mate?" Neville Longbottom, ever vigilant, came last, his eyes wide with shock. There's a child inside you, Harry." "A child," Harry croaked, his hand flying to his stomach. Beneath his palm, his bed jacket felt rigid and warm in a way that made no sense at all. At Neville's words, every other boy in the room tumbled out of bed. They formed a tight circle around Harry, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. Ron's voice trembled. "What's happening to you?" Harry closed his eyes, breath coming in ragged gasps. He dared not move his hand. "I don't know," he whispered, though the strange weight against his body left him certain that this was no ordinary dream. Harry said nothing. He carefully draped the quilt over the child, tucking it in snugly so she would stay warm. As he smoothed out each fold, a strange conviction settled in his chest. He felt a blood tie to this little girl, as if she were his own flesh and blood. "My thanks to Long Tianshu, to all my classmates for their monthly passes, and to everyone who shared, recommended, or subscribed. Your support means the world." Chapter 686, Good Friend Ryan Hogwarts. 8th floor sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the suite, illuminating the plush queen-sized bed in the center of the room. Kate stretched and slipped into her robes, stifling a yawn. Across from her, Penelope hovered her wand, replaying a flickering projection in midair. Kate glanced up. "So that's why you screamed last night?" she asked, tugging on her shawl. Penelope frowned and gave her wand another flourish. The phantom scene rewound to the moment Rabistan Lestrange appeared, cradling a newborn infant. Penelope studied it intently. "Something doesn't add up," she said. "If that child was conceived back then, the timeline's wrong. It's only been about 6 months since July, hibiscus season, so how could the baby already be here?" Kate shook her head. "It can't be a premature birth. Remember what we saw on Death Eaters? Voldemort's followers gorge on every nutritious creature they find. Rats, bats, cockroaches, you name it. And don't forget hawklap. Horrible taste, but surprisingly filling." Penelope tapped her chin. "Right, and Ryan told us that, ever since Voldemort claimed the island, his Death Eaters have enjoyed perfect health and the best supplies available. Premature birth is out of the question. Besides, throughout the entire series, Bellatrix never showed a hint of pregnancy." They exchanged puzzled looks, each of them wondering what mystery lay hidden behind that single memory. As the projection hovered between them, the unanswered questions swirled even thicker than the silvery mist of the Pensieve. Kate and Penelope cried out together, "What's happening?" Ryan swallowed a laugh before answering. "This child isn't normal. Like I mentioned, Azkaban and the entire island has been cut off from our world, locked inside the same dimension that houses Voldemort's incarnate spirit. When he returns, Reality will snap back into place, but for now it feels more like the realm of an ancient god than a prison. His followers, marked by the Dark Lord's sign, have already shed much of their mortal frailty. It's a bit like the incident when I channeled Star-Lord in my moon fantasy vessel. My magic, guided by Providence, Voldemort's own subconscious, turned the poison in those fish into something that heightened a wizard's instincts, even if it left them dazed. What we didn't foresee was how that process would degrade genetic material itself. The embryo that became this child was fused with the magical essence of 3 wizards who were present that day, then further charged by Voldemort's power. And in August, Harry Potter added Bella's living blood through a dream ritual at the Burrow. In short, this isn't a normal pregnancy. There's no natural womb involved, just a tapestry of dark magic holding everything together. In reality, the child exists only in the mind of a wizard, an illusion born of Bella Lestrange's dream. Penelo stood motionless, still reeling from the revelation. Kate, however, drew in a steadying breath and turned to Ryan. "So," Kate said, voice sharp, "you're telling me that Rodolphus Lestrange actually found Lestrange DNA in that child?" Ryan nodded gravely. "Not just the Lestranges. The boy carries genetic traces of Crouch Jr., Harry Potter, Bella herself, and even Voldemort. Although Bella never physically gave birth, the moment this child slipped from her dream into the real world, her body, and registered the imprint of childbirth. And because of the child's psychic connection to Voldemort, everyone involved was pulled into the illusion. The Lestrange brothers, and Bella too, became convinced she was pregnant. They locked her away, awaited the birth, and swore they watched her deliver the child just like any ordinary mother. As for the other Death Eaters, they simply assumed she'd taken ill and stayed in her quarters." Penelo's eyes flickered with disbelief, but Kate's mind was racing. "Hold on. So you're saying both Voldemort and Harry Potter are, in effect, the child's fathers? Never mind Voldemort. He's practically one with that dimension now. But Harry? He's been holed up at the Burrow all this time. Are you sure this isn't the work of that Sequence 9 potion you developed, the Dark Wizard formula?" Ryan hesitated, his expression unreadable. "That's exactly what we need to figure out." Penelo's eyes went wide. "That's it. Exactly what we need. Remember how the manual describes the Dark Wizard? A Dark Wizard is born with a twisted, instinctive mastery of black magic, able to learn hundreds of curses, jinxes, and poison spells in the blink of an eye. No dark incantation lies beyond their grasp." "Well," Penelo continued, voice low and urgent, "the secret ingredient in our potion isn't a rare herb or a stolen corpse. It's the shadow lingering in the mirror realm. In truth, it's the fragmented remnant of Voldemort himself, trapped between dimensions. When Harry Potter absorbs that shadow, he will literally be digesting Lord Voldemort's power. Here's how it works. Remember the locket Jerry swallowed in the mirror realm? It still holds Voldemort's discarded memories, his fears, his ambitions, even his hidden, obsessive love for Bella. By channeling those memories, we can re-manifest Voldemort's essence. Then, through a shared dream, Harry, wielding the locket, will guide that essence into Bella's womb. In her womb lies an egg carrying 3 strands of genetic material, Harry's, Bella's, and the Dark Lord's. Ordinarily, it's sterile, degenerated beyond hope. But in the dreamscape, we inject it with bones and blood infused by Voldemort's ancient magic. We turn imagination into reality. Under Harry's guidance, the shadow power animates the egg, coaxing it to develop into a living embryo. Everything happens in that dream realm, anchored by Voldemort's shadow. By dawn, the impossible becomes fact. A 3-lineage life begins to grow." Penelo paused, letting the enormity of her plan sink in. The room fell silent. Ambitious, terrifying, and somehow undeniably brilliant. Kate stared at Ryan, her brow furrowing. "Wait, are you saying Harry Potter actually borrowed Voldemort's own magic, then used genetic material from the Lestrange brothers and Crouch Jr., plus those degraded remnants of Bellatrix's egg to create a living embryo? He turned fantasy into reality, grew it in Bella's dream, and then gave birth to it?" Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know it sounds impossible, but magic is limitless. If you can imagine it, you can do it. And honestly, if you hadn't just fed more of Harry's power into that ritual, Bellatrix herself never would have been able to strangle that newborn to death. Its origins were that extraordinary." Penelope nodded slowly. Yet even before she was fully formed, that child could influence the Death Eaters. Yes, she drew on the same dark force once mastered by Voldemort, but that only makes the whole thing more incredible. Kate's shoulders slumped as dread washed over her. But think about what it means. Any harm the child suffers will ricochet back onto Bellatrix, and this little girl has no inherent moral compass. Her very nature will tilt toward evil and shadow. It's terrifying. They fell silent, each caught between awe and horror at the miracle and the menace they had just witnessed. No matter how you slice it, whether a mother kills her daughter or the daughter kills her mother, it's intolerable. Family bonds aren't something to be toyed with. That's why when Harry used his dreams to summon the child, I decided to give it a little push. A dream? A summoning? Why rule out every other possibility? Kate's eyes sparkled with mischief. If you hadn't stepped in, Ryan, the child could have slipped into Harry's dream and been reborn at Hogwarts through him. Ryan shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. No chance. The child won't choose that route. Inside Azkaban, you've got Bellatrix, the Lestrange brothers, Crouch Jr., and Voldemort himself. At Hogwarts, there's only Harry, well, and the young version of Voldemort, if you count him. If it were purely a matter of survival, why would I interfere? Letting Fate play out is far more entertaining. Kate stuck out her tongue in mock exasperation. I thought you had a soft spot for Harry. Didn't want to deceive him too much? Mercy? Ryan chuckled. On the contrary, this is the most fascinating outcome. In earlier versions of my plan, I even considered making Ron drink a polyjuice potion spiked with Harry's DNA. Penelope exchanged a quick glance with Kate, sympathy flashing in her eyes. Then why abandon that idea? She asked softly. For the first time, she truly felt sorry for Harry. Having a friend like Ryan meant life was never dull. He shrugged. With this kid around, adding another one would just be a bit boring. Chapter 274. Harry, is this your child? 5 o'clock in the morning. The Ravenclaw common room, normally cloaked in shadows at this hour, was unusually bright. Penello, Ravenclaw prefect and student union president, had sent an urgent missive to every professor on patrol and personally overseen the security arrangements. As a result, no one dared approach. The curious students huddled behind the archway, whispering and casting furtive glances toward the empty lounge. At the far end of the room, Harry sat on the couch before a freshly rekindled fireplace, a tiny child cradled in his arms. Ginny stood close by, introducing herself as his fiancée and gently cooing to the baby whenever he stirred. The scene was at once tender and astonishing. None of the professors would have been surprised to hear that Harry was remarkable, but this was on a whole new level. Professor Minerva McGonagall arrived first. She rushed in without pausing to change out of her tartan dressing gown and hairnet, her stern features softened by genuine anxiety. "Where is the child? What's going on?" she demanded, striding straight toward Harry. Harry looked up, the baby's soft coos filling the silence. Meeting McGonagall's worried gaze, he drew a steadying breath. "Professor, this is—" He paused, lifting the infant slightly so McGonagall could see him. "My son." Ginny pressed closer, offering a reassuring smile. The child gurgled in his father's arms, blinking wide-eyed at the professor's astonished face. For a moment, even the crackling fire seemed to hush in wonder. Then McGonagall, usually so unflappable, drew in a sharp breath and placed a trembling hand against her heart. "My goodness," she whispered. "Harry, is this truly your child?" Harry nodded, meeting her gaze with steady calm. "Yes, Professor. We found him. Well, Ginny spotted him outside the Forbidden Forest just before dawn. I promise I'll explain everything, once we're all safe and private." McGonagall's eyes darted to the empty doorways, as if expecting more professors to burst in. Then she softened, stepping forward to peer at the sleeping infant. "He's perfect," she said, voice thick with relief. "Come, let's get you somewhere more comfortable. We'll sort this out together." As Ginny helped Harry to his feet, the hush in the common room deepened. Outside, the first pale light of dawn brushed the castle towers, and with it, a host of questions waiting to be answered. Harry opened his mouth to speak, but Professor McGonagall's firm voice cut him off. "Not here, Harry. We mustn't discuss the child in front of everyone." She turned away from him and surveyed the students clustered behind the stone archway. Then, with an approving nod toward Penello, she said, "Well done." A hush fell over the stands. McGonagall paused, as though holding back a sharp remark. After all, if this had been Gryffindor, could Percy have kept those monkeys in line? Finally, she tapped her quill on the edge of the podium and announced, 10 points to Ravenclaw. Her tone was neither lavish nor reluctant. But Harry knew better than anyone how Ravenclaw's score had ballooned this term, thanks in large part to his extra Saturday tutoring sessions, and how they now led Slytherin by 150 points, with Gryffindor trailing even further behind. McGonagall's stern features softened into a frown as she awarded the points, and Harry jolted upright in his seat, worried he might have displeased her. His concern vanished in an instant, however, when she glanced at the child standing shyly in the arch. The severity drained from her eyes and was replaced by a gentle, almost tender smile. In that moment, Professor McGonagall looked decades younger. Even the precise French twist in her hair seemed to loosen, letting a few stray curls fall free. Harry and Ginny exchanged stunned looks. They had never seen the Transfiguration Professor so relaxed, so utterly at ease. It wasn't that they'd never seen Professor McGonagall smile before. She'd cracked a grin at Harry and Ginny's engagement party and even laughed at Sly, Theron's Quidditch fiasco last term. But this gentle warmth was new entirely. As though afraid of disturbing the sleeping infant in Harry's arms, she bent her stern face into something almost tender and said softly, "Go to my study, Harry. Professor Dumbledore is waiting for you there." With a quick, precise flick of her wand, the swaddling quilt around the baby began to expand. Layers of padding thickened instantly, leaving only the child's little face visible. 2 silken ribbons sprouted at the edges and tied themselves neatly behind the baby's neck. The entire bundle now looked like a little cocoon, and McGonagall's transfiguration charm had even comically improved its soundproofing, muffling every creak and rustle. She stepped back, then turned to Penelope Clearwater, who was hovering anxiously nearby. "Penelope, see to it that the other students get back to the dormitories at once." Her tone sharpened. "And you, Ginny, you should go straight to bed." Clearing her throat, McGonagall addressed the small crowd one final time. "All of you, off to bed. You have classes in the morning, remember?" Ginny sighed but obeyed, trudging up the stairs. Penelope gathered the excited younger students and ushered them toward the portrait hole. McGonagall handed the muffled bundle back to Harry, gave him a brief nod, and set off toward the archway. Harry followed, cradling the baby as they left the common room side by side, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the now silent quilt. After they descended the spiral staircase, Argus Filch and Mrs. Norris were waiting below, though nothing felt quite the same as before. Instead of the usual flickering oil lamp, Filch held aloft his brand-new elm wand, Lumos shining steadily at the tip. Since he'd discovered magic, he'd taken every chance to use it. "Is this the child?" Filch asked in a low voice, his usual scowl melting into something almost tender. Mrs. Norris, too, sat unusually still, her green eyes fixed on the newborn rather than hissing in her customary, unearthly meow. "Continue patrolling the corridors, Argus," Professor McGonagall instructed softly. "I'll take Harry and the baby to my study." Filch inclined his head, and guided by the soft glow of his wand, slipped away with his cat into the corridor's shadows. McGonagall led the way up the hallway, her robes whispering against the cold stone. When they reached a more private wing, she turned to Harry. "Harry," she said gently, "can you tell me how this child came to be here?" Harry swallowed. He felt an odd pull in his chest, as if the infant were connected to him by some silent thread. If he confessed that the baby's parents had been notorious Death Eaters, if he revealed the truth, would Professor McGonagall and the others still show her kindness? After all, McGonagall was a founding member of the Order of the Phoenix, and many of her friends had fallen to those dark wizards. He paused at the study door, uncertain what to say. But behind him, the soft tap of Filch's wand dimming reassured him that, at least for now, they all stood on the same side, determined to protect this child, no matter her bloodline. Harry paused at the door, glancing back at the little girl cradled against his chest. What would Neville think if he discovered her parents were the very criminals who had driven Harry's own family to the brink of madness? Would Neville still be so gentle with her, the way he'd been in the Gryffindor dormitory? Harry wasn't sure. He felt an overwhelming urge to hide the truth, to spare this child from her bloodline, and give her a chance to grow up happy, loved by her friends, not shunned by their suspicion or scorn. "Professor, I don't really know," Harry said, forcing a calm smile. "She just apparated here on her own." Minerva McGonagall's sharp eyes flicked between him and the baby. "Alone? A child that young?" She took a small step forward, her voice a careful whisper. Harry shrugged. "I found her in the corridor outside the Great Hall. No trunks, no parents." His lie came easily. He'd honed the art of half-tight Ruths long ago. McGonagall hesitated, then nodded as though she believed every word. They crossed Hogwarts' dimly lit halls in silence, the baby cooing softly against Harry's robes. At last they reached the professor's private study. The door swung open to reveal Albus Dumbledore standing by the fire, robes rustling as he rose to greet them. "Minerva, Harry, what's happened?" Dumbledore asked, though she'd already begun explaining. Harry stepped forward, carefully handing the child into Dumbledore's waiting arms. The headmaster's silver half-moons reflected the firelight as he studied her, tiny, wide-eyed, clutching his robes with one mittened hand. A long, measured sigh escaped him. "Poor little one," he murmured, voice gentle. "Come now, let's see what we can do for you." His blue eyes lingered on her in quiet concern, and for a moment Harry allowed himself to hope that this child might truly find shelter and love here, far from her parents' dark shadow. Albus Dumbledore's pale blue eyes seemed to penetrate right through Harry. Uneasily, Harry felt those eyes flick from the infant's face to her body, as if seeking some hidden clue. Please don't know too much about pure-blood anatomy, he thought frantically. Rodolphus Lestrange had boasted in Harry's dream about the Lestrange family's distinctive muscular traits. If Dumbledore recognized them, it would be devastating. "Harry," Dumbledore said gently, "this child is yours." Harry's heart stuttered. "She isn't," he began, but the words caught in his throat. "What did you just say?" Minerva McGonagall stepped forward, her expression incredulous. "Albus, are you certain? Harry hasn't had a single moment away from Hogwarts this term. Before that, he was at the Burrow, and earlier still at the Black Residence. It's simply impossible that he could have fathered this child." Dumbledore didn't answer immediately. He stood a moment longer, eyes fixed on the baby, as though weighing every possibility. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured and unwavering. "This child is extraordinary. By any normal standard, she shouldn't exist. Physically, she appears only 5 or 6 months old, yet she arrived fully formed and perfectly healthy, with no sign of prematurity. Such a birth could not occur without powerful magics influencing her development. Given everything I have observed, there is only one explanation. Harry is her father." Harry's knees threatened to buckle. He tightened his grip on the baby, speechless. Around him, the two most powerful wizards in Britain exchanged troubled glances, each weighing the impossible truth of Dumbledore's words. The only way to account for their shared blood is that she's his daughter. And if you line up the dates I noted for the child with the time Harry spent inside that enchanted mirror world, it all fits. She must have come through the mirror. Chapter 688. Accidental. 5, maybe 6 months? Harry murmured to himself, his mind drifting back to that strange period. After absorbing Voldemort's residual magic, he'd spent days trapped in half-formed memories, dreams in which he was not Harry Potter at all, but the Dark Lord. In those dreams, he'd lain with young Bella over and over again. It felt odd now, recalling how vivid it all was, the unmistakable sensation of his body responding, of something passing between them. And yet, every time he awoke, he felt inexplicably refreshed. Could it be that those nightly encounters somehow transmitted something to Bella in her cell in the North Sea? And what of Rodolphus's fury in today's vision? Perhaps that wrath stemmed from discovering the child wasn't truly a Lestrange. His calmness then might simply have been the aftermath of rage fully spent, so overpowering that nothing could disturb him further. Harry remembered how, despite Bella's murderous impulse toward the baby, Rodolphus had still entrusted the child to her and left them alone together. "Maybe she really is my daughter," Harry said, voice rough. "All this time I've felt a blood tie. Perhaps I behaved like a foolish child in that mirror world, lost in illusions." He paused, noting the half-truth in his own words. There was more to the story, and Harry knew it, but for now he let the silence fill the rest. Despite his unparalleled skill at detecting deception without needing legitimacy, even Dumbledore had failed to spot the lie in Harry's words. Professor McGonagall, her tone edged with urgency, asked again, "Where is the child's mother?" Harry could only shake his head. "Perhaps there is no mother," Dumbledore said thoughtfully. "This child seems to have been born of an illusory dimension, a fusion of Harry's blood and magical power." Unspoken, though heavy in his mind, was the suspicion that the child's true mother might be Tom Riddle. By the time the new term began, Dumbledore had come to a startling conclusion. Although Harry still bore the status of a Horcrux, Voldemort's fragmented soul within him had been completely expunged. If he hadn't already known Harry's secret, he might never have discerned the virtually non-existent link between the boy and the Dark Lord. And yet, there remained a peculiar echo in the child, a vestige of Voldemort not as he existed now, nor as the young Tom Riddle, but as the middle-aged wizard who had slain the Potters and forged Harry into a Horcrux. When Dumbledore factored in Voldemort's own magical transformations over the years, the truth became chillingly clear. Perhaps it was the moment Harry's darker self briefly broke free, when that long-hidden fragment of Voldemort was purged, merging with Harry's own magic and the strange energies of the mirror world, that this child came into being. And tonight, guided through Harry's lingering connection to that realm, she was born right here at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall, standing just a few paces away, had turned utterly pale. She blinked at the tiny bundle in Harry's arms and muttered, "Bone and blood? A newborn at school? Really?" Harry held the baby gently, uncertain but determined. "What will happen to her?" he asked, his voice steady. "I want to keep her with me, bring her to lessons, let her grow up here." He paused, glancing at McGonagall. "As for her mother, that will have to remain a secret. Only I can cross into the mirror world to find her. As Professor Dumbledore said, she has no mother in our world." Dumbledore, who had been watching from the doorway, nodded gravely. "Then let her stay with you, Harry. You are her guardian now." Inwardly, he steeled himself for the difficult conversation he would soon have with Tom Riddle. After all, Harry's mysterious new daughter was also Riddle's child in a strange, twisted way. McGonagall tore her eyes from the baby's tiny, perfect features. She nodded unconsciously, then shook herself back to form. "But this is a school," she protested, voice trembling slightly. "How will you manage when you have lessons? Who will okay after her if you're in class or otherwise occupied? Harry, you're still only a student yourself." Her eyes welled with concern as she straightened her robes. "I only want what's best for you both." Professor McGonagall folded her arms and met Dumbledore's gaze. "What if Ginny objects? We should consider her feelings, too." Dumbledore shook his head, his silver beard trembling slightly. "I've thought of that, Minerva. When Harry is in class, the house elves will keep an eye on her, and I expect all of you, every professor who passes through these halls, to help as well." McGonagall's brow furrowed. "Why insist on keeping her here at Hogwarts, Albus? Wouldn't she be safer at home with her mother?" "Because," Dumbledore explained gently, "the child's birth was unorthodox. She belongs to a branch of magic we've never encountered before. I've examined her. She's perfectly healthy, unmistakably a witch, and remarkably gifted, yet she clearly needs to remain close to her blood relatives. Just a moment ago, when I severed her connection with Harry, even briefly, her magic began to fluctuate wildly." Harry, who had been standing nearby in thoughtful silence, took a step forward. "What if it's more than just an emotional reaction? What if her magic is fundamentally unstable, defective?" "Then you needn't worry," Dumbledore said, his eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. "Even if her magical disturbance stems from the very nature of her birth, it will settle once she gains self-awareness. Until then, keeping her here, under our care and close to Harry, is the best way to ensure she grows strong and secure." McGonagall exchanged a glance with Harry, saw the concern mirrored in his eyes, and nodded reluctantly. Dumbledore's confidence was unshakable. If anyone could guide this mysterious child safely into her magical future, it was the headmaster of Hogwarts. "Although this child's birth falls outside the limits of our current magical understanding," Dumbledore said, "I don't consider it an insurmountable problem. My research has long since outpaced that of most wizards." Professor McGonagall leaned forward, already calculating logistics. How long can she safely be separated from Harry at most? Dumbledore adjusted his half-moon spectacles. By my estimate, about 13 hours. Harry let out a relieved sigh and stroked the soft swaddle against his chest, gazing adoringly at his daughter's tiny face. Then I'll take her back to the Gryffindor common room. Before he could move, McGonagall caught his arm. Mr. Potter, you have no experience caring for an infant. You'll stay here under my supervision. Attend your classes tomorrow, and after they end, well within those 13 hours, you can bring her back. Harry gaped at her. He finally had a daughter, and now she was being kept from him. He opened his mouth to protest, until he realized that Professor McGonagall, like himself, had never raised a child. And yet she was confidently making all the decisions. Quietly, he bit back his objections. For now, he would have to trust them, and wait. Harry only managed a flat, "Okay." "Then off to bed, Potter," Professor McGonagall said crisply. With a quick flick of her wand, the straps of the swaddling cloth loosened and drifted away from Harry, freeing the bundle in his arms. A second wave of her wand transformed the low wooden stool beside her into an elegant cradle. Gently, the infant settled inside the woven basket. "Remember, Potter, you must take good care of her." Harry gave a curt nod and slipped out of the study. As the door clicked shut behind him, McGonagall's voice drifted through the crack. "Albus, go and get some rest. She'll wake soon and might startle you." In the room of requirement, orderly chaos reigned. Penello flitted about, making sure the dozens of enchanted beds and feeding stations remained in place. Kate, pacing back and forth with nothing to do, kept an eye on the swaddled baby lying in a low, padded crib at the room's center. She leaned toward Ryan, lowering her voice. "Her magic is wildly unstable. It isn't the kind of arcane reaction Dumbledore suspected, something innate to her power. You said she was already influencing people while still in the womb. That must mean her mind isn't blank like a newborn's. She's conscious, could even be trying to communicate." Ryan frowned, adjusting his robes. "It's the only explanation. A child that young shouldn't be able to reach into another person's thoughts. Yet every test we've run shows she's doing just that. Her awareness, her intelligence, it's far beyond what we expected." Kate watched the baby's tiny chest rise and fall. "Then we need to figure out how to talk to her, or at least understand what she's trying to say." Ryan nodded, stepping closer. "Agreed. If we can teach her language as soon as possible, before her power grows any more, we might keep her magic from spiraling out of control." Together, they bent over the cradle, determined to bridge the silent gap between an extraordinary child and the world she was destined to change. When Dumbledore used magic to separate her from Harry for a moment, it wasn't punishment. It was because she was upset at the thought of leaving her father behind. But when Harry actually turned to go, she didn't object. "Why not?" Ryan gave a small, knowing smile. "As you suggested, she isn't lacking in intelligence. She understood perfectly well that her father never intended to abandon her, and with Professor McGonagall and Dumbledore standing before her, two people she instinctively trusted, there was no need to panic. They were a far cry from her unstable mother, the one who had once tried to kill her." Harry frowned, still uneasy. Even so, she must have been frightened. "She was," Ryan agreed, "but she also knew you'd come back for her. Trust is a powerful thing, especially for someone her age." He paused, watching Harry's expression soften. "Let's just say, she chose to believe in the people who genuinely cared for her." Harry let out a slow breath. "I just hope I can live up to that trust." "You will," Ryan said confidently, "because you've never given her a reason to doubt you." Chapter 276. The Child's Mother Gets It. Stepping into the room was like walking into someone's fever dream. Contradictory artifacts jostled for space in its cramped confines. A gleaming silver crucifix hung beside a coiled serpent carved from obsidian. Dusty archaeological relics stood cheek by jowl with the latest high-tech gadgets. A well-worn Bible lay open on the desk, and several loaded revolvers sat ominously within arm's reach. By all appearances, you might have guessed at least 5 very different people lived here. A devout priest, a devil worshipper, a history-obsessed archaeologist, a cutting-edge technophile, and a gourmet-loving Western gunslinger. It certainly didn't look like the quarters of Hogwarts' Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. And yet, it was exactly that. This was the domain of Tom Riddle, the flesh-and-blood manifestation of Voldemort's diary Horcrux. Though he took the form of a strikingly handsome youth not yet 19, he embodied 1/7 of the Dark Lord himself. Every vestige of the former Professor Quirrell had been erased. Quirrell, who had once whimpered and begged Voldemort for mercy, only to be punished with such utter humiliation that he lost control of his own body. Even the life-sized mirror that once stood opposite the door had vanished, replaced by a sinuous, serpent-shaped sculpture hovering on the wall, its painted eyes gleaming with uncanny life. In this chamber of discordant treasures, the true master reigned supreme, and anyone who stepped across its threshold would soon learn that appearances like mirrors can be deceiving. By all rights, Tom Riddle should have been sleeping now, deep within the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. It was Tuesday, January 25th, not a weekend when one might loiter below Hogwarts. Yet, in the cavern's hush, the great stone serpent carved into the wall began to writhe. Scales shifted, the mouth cracked open, and through a circular portal, Riddle emerged, cloaked in black. He drew his wand and executed 3 precise flicks. Instantly, the chamber stirred. Statues bowed, curtains parted, and the hidden entrance behind him slid shut as if swallowed by the snake's jaws. A fine copper kettle, once empty, suddenly brimmed with steaming coffee. An unseen hand coaxed it toward the central table, tilting so that rich, aromatic liquid poured into a waiting china cup. On a nearby platter, fresh slices of bread appeared as the 2 ornate high-backed chairs glided into position beside the table. A soft creak announced a second arrival. The door swung open, and Albus Dumbledore stepped inside, his eyes alight with curiosity as he took in the chamber's unexpected hospitality. Tom Riddle strode over to the wooden table and took a seat. Dumbledore lingered nearby, an unmistakable excitement lighting up his eyes. "Well?" he asked. "Are you pleased?" Riddle lifted an eyebrow. Just half an hour ago, before the owl's arrival, he'd been resting here in this very room. The moment Dumbledore's letter arrived, he'd slipped through the newly built secret passage into the Slytherin common room. After all, repeatedly lingering outside the girls' grey restrooms would draw too much attention. There, he'd paused to pray, then returned early to make all the necessary arrangements. Now, from Dumbledore's brisk approach and the easy curve of his smile, it was clear the headmaster could hardly wait to share his news. Fingertips brushing the polished wood of his wand, Riddle wondered what could have stirred Dumbledore so. Had he uncovered a new lead on Grindelwald? Or perhaps something even more extraordinary? Dumbledore's grin widened. "It concerns a child who has appeared quite unexpectedly." Riddle allowed himself a small, speculative smile of his own. "How wonderful! And whose name will the child bear? Dumbledore or Grindelwald?" He lifted his coffee mug and tapped it lightly against Dumbledore's, a silent toast to whatever lay ahead. In the quiet glow of Dumbledore's office, the headmaster and Tom Riddle faced each other across a long oak table. Dumbledore's brow was deeply furrowed as he gathered his thoughts. "I think you've misunderstood," Dumbledore began, his voice low but firm. "I'm not talking about the child you have in mind. I mean the infant who simply appeared in Harry's bed not long after his birth." Riddle's dark eyes narrowed. "A newborn? Why would it come to me? Wait." He rubbed his temple as if warding off a headache. "Could this be connected to me? Some experiment I left unfinished, born at precisely this time, drawn to Hogwarts because Harry is, in effect, my Horcrux?" Dumbledore shook his head gently. "I understand why you'd suspect that, but she isn't an experiment. It's merely a coincidence. Have you forgotten the mirror world?" "Far from it," Riddle replied smoothly. "I've witnessed what Harry summoned from that world, the mighty, awe-inspiring Plutosaurus." Dumbledore's expression grew more serious. "Then you must have noticed the change in Harry's magic. He didn't destroy his darker self. He fused with it." "We've already discussed his strange physical transformation and the near-perfect mastery he now wields," Riddle said. Dumbledore leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I have a theory, and my observations suggest it may be true." Riddle's face went pale, and his eyes fluttered shut for a moment as if he'd seen something terrible. When he opened them again, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "Is this connected to the child? I'm afraid that when Harry merged with his other self, being a living Horcrux, his power specialized into something unprecedented." Perhaps it has something to do with the mirror world's strange environment, the narrator said. The child I mentioned, she literally just appeared. Just appeared? When? Earlier tonight. Or not even that long ago. So she's only just been born? In Harry Potter's bed? How did that even work? Did she arrive through childbirth? Is Potter's stomach suddenly swollen? Tom Riddle's lips curled into a cruel smile. He suspected this mysterious child might somehow be tied to him. But if she belonged to Harry Potter, and Potter hadn't drunk any strange potion, how could a man possibly give birth? I'm afraid that's not the case, the narrator replied. Harry didn't give birth to her. She wasn't born in the material world at all. From what I've been able to discover, she was born in an illusory dimension, more like a dream made real. A dream? Riddle's eyes glittered with intrigue. Could she be anything like Merlin? They say Merlin himself descended from nightmares. Was he born in this way? Perhaps, came the quiet answer. After all, nightmares have always been the stuff of legend. Maybe they're creatures from some mirror realm, Dumbledore offered, his voice growing thoughtful as he toyed with the idea of Merlin's legends. Then he pushed the thought aside, a faint smile touching his lips. But let's not dwell on that. I suspect you know exactly why I summoned you today. Tom Riddle leaned back, shrugging one shoulder. You mean, she's my daughter, in a sense. No, let me be blunt. You're saying she's literally the child of Harry Potter and me. Just like you and Grindelwald were once intimate. This is your revenge. Your way of humiliating me, of proving I can't even control my own body. For the first time in their conversation, Dumbledore didn't meet Riddle's gaze. He stared into his steaming coffee, watching the tendrils of vapor drift upward. His ears flushed faint pink. You're right, Tom, but this isn't about me or Gellert now. It's about the child. Have you given any thought to what comes next? Should I tell Harry the truth about your connection? He already knows the child is his. Minerva knows as well. They simply believe there's no biological mother. In truth, that mother is you. Tom's dark eyes narrowed. My opinion? You want to chain me with your plans? Use this child as your pawn? Do my recent changes trouble you? Riddle asked with a sneer. Not at all, Dumbledore replied calmly. I'm well aware of the magic you learned from that corpulent monk. Your newfound powers concern me less than this. Every child deserves a stable family, and parents play an irreplaceable role. Riddle arched an eyebrow. And what of her? Does she show promise? Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Indeed she does. Perhaps she truly is another Merlin. Chapter 690. Yes, I have a child. The roar of the crowd was still echoing through the stands when the dust settled on Hogwarts' team competition. The very next day, the much-anticipated individual second round was slated to begin, yet no one expected a new scandal to upstage every match, spell, and strategy session. By dawn, whispers had erupted across the castle. A baby had appeared in Harry Potter's dormitory bed. Within hours, the rumor mill exploded, and every portrait, common room, and corridor knew the tale. Finally, in the great hall at breakfast, Harry stood and met the sea of questioning gazes. With calm resolve and the faintest hint of a proud smile, he announced, Yes, it's true. I have a child. A collective gasp rippled through the students. Ron Weasley nearly choked on his pumpkin juice. He'd come back to Hogwarts with Ginny's reconciliation fresh in his heart, but this revelation left him speechless. You're joking, right? He stammered. Harry shook his head gently. No joke, he said, voice warm and steady. She needs a father. I've seen too many children grow up without one. I won't let that be her fate. Ginny, seated nearby, went white as parchment. She'd been bracing herself for every possibility, but never this. Her grip tightened on her helmet, then dropped it to the table with a hollow clatter. Armor cups and padding fell away, as though she could shed the news's weight physically. Sweat beaded on her brow, and a cold tremor ran through her core. Her heart pounded so fiercely she feared everyone could hear it. Silence reigned for a long moment. Then Ron found his voice. Harry, is it really yours? A baby? Harry glanced toward the Slytherin table, where a few curious faces leaned in, and back at his friends. He nodded. Her name is Lily. I brought her here for protection after she was orphaned. I swear I'll keep her safe. Ginny's breath caught. Tears pricked her eyes as relief, fierce concern, and something harder to name surged through her. Harry had always protected others. Now, unexpectedly, he'd brought new life under his wing, and Hogwarts would never be the same. Life had drained of every last color, like a scion with its tail bound, like a Jinchuriki torn from its beast, like Ultraman robbed of his light. All hope seemed extinguished. Ginny's eyes filled with tears. Oh, am I really that hopeless? Do you even consider me your fiancé anymore? Was I just a placeholder from the start? Tell me, who is this child's mother? Let's just break up. But Ginny wasn't destined to languish in despair. The moment she discovered this child had no real mother, her entire attitude shifted. From now on, I'll be her mother, she declared. Harry, when you have no classes, let's visit Professor McGonagall together in the evenings. Ryan, who had the rather dubious gift of hearing Ginny's unspoken thoughts, could barely contain his laughter. He just caught her private confession at the exact moment she spoke those firm words. I don't actually want to break up. If Harry really insists, I'll have to fall to my knees, cling to his legs, and beg him through my tears to take me back. Please don't leave me, Harry. Sometimes it's downright hilarious to peek inside someone's head. All Ryan could say afterward was that she'd really made him cry his eyes out. By now, everyone knew the rest of the story. Ginny had stepped forward to claim the mysterious girl as her own, even reconciling with Ron in the process. But to stamp out any lingering gossip, Harry stood up at the luncheon in the Great Hall and addressed the entire school. Let me be perfectly clear, he began, his voice carrying across the long tables. This child has no mother in the usual sense. I alone carried her, a vessel, much like Merlin's mother once was. And as for me, I am her father. I ask you all not to look upon her origins through any colored lens. She has parents. Ginny, my fiancée, has promised to raise her as her mother. According to Ryan's quick summary, Harry's announcement contained two essential points. Yes, the child is his. And yes, she entered the world by extraordinary means, just as the great Merlin once did. All the rest, his plea for decency, his colored lens remark, was simply window dressing. To silence any doubters, Dumbledore himself had publicly confirmed that Ginny was not the girl's biological mother, but had voluntarily agreed to take her in. And really, the only scandal here was Harry's choice of metaphor. After all, British wizards love exclaiming Merlin's beard, Merlin's boots, or even Merlin's socks whenever they're astonished. If this child truly mirrored Merlin's miraculous birth, then let wonder replace suspicion. There was nothing more to it. After the story of the child's miraculous birth was told, Sirius Black was the first to arrive at Hogwarts, anxious to meet his godson. He gave Harry and Ginny a warm but brief greeting, peeked at the newborn, then hurried off, claiming pressing business elsewhere. Kate, who had been hoping for a grand entrance, was furious. Bellatrix is his cousin. With the black blood on the maternal side, how could Sirius not sense anything odd? Ryan just shrugged. Frankly, I wouldn't expect Sirius to pick up on it. If anyone's going to spot something strange, it's Dumbledore. He's far more perceptive. Pureblood family trees are already tangled, and this child's ancestry is unprecedentedly complex. On one side, you've got Harry Potter's power and, astonishingly, Voldemort's essence. Their marks will be the most obvious in the baby. Then there's the Black family's ancient, untainted magic. But the most concealed legacy comes from the Crouch line, a mental resilience that shields him even from powerful mind spells. That's the talent that keeps his mind clear through years of imperious curses and even against Voldemort's own hypnotic assaults. It's subtle enough that only someone like Dumbledore would notice it. Dumbledore noted that the infant's sturdy build, the powerful masseter muscles, rock-solid mandibles, and almost steel-like teeth spoke unmistakably of Harry's restored bloodline. It was as if, through magic, Harry's ancestral strength had reawakened in the child. After all, it was that same current of inherited power, amplified by a circle of warding charms and Poppy Pomfrey's transfiguration magic, that had once felled a raging fire drake on the Hogwarts grounds. In the weeks that followed, Ryan couldn't help but smile at the avalanche of mail arriving for Harry. As the Wizarding World's VIP Owl Post recipient, he'd been granted extra mail slots, and the castle had converted an entire chamber to hold his deliveries. In less than 24 hours, the room was overflowing with letters of congratulations, hand-stitched blankets, enchanted rattles, and almost without fail, suggestions for the baby's name. Some of the more enthusiastic correspondents even hinted that the little girl might one day rival Merlin himself. It wasn't only distant admirers offering advice. Professor McGonagall, Madame Pomfrey, and Professor Sprout, each of whom had tended so carefully to Ginny and her daughter, had their own favorite names. Even Mrs. Weasley, who'd rushed to Hogwarts to be near her children, pressed Harry and Ginny for their decision, certain she knew just the perfect name for the newest member of the Potter family. Chapter 7. The Naming Dilemma. The entire household, and even a few of Hogwarts' faculty, had weighed in on the Potter baby's name. Professor McGonagall was the first to speak up as she polished her spectacles. "We might as well call her Merlin. Truly, she deserves that name." Madame Pomfrey, not to be outdone, countered gently, "What about Dalice, after Dalice Derwent, the renowned therapist from St. Mungo's and later Hogwarts' principal in the mid-18th century?" Professor Sprout and Mrs. Weasley both nodded in agreement. They loved Dalice, but they all insisted on non-negotiable detail. Her middle name had to be Ginevra. Ginevra Molly Weasley, Mrs. Weasley reminded everyone fondly, was Ginny's grand name, so it's only fair. Soon the pressure fell square, evenly on Harry and Ginny. Neither objected to using Ginevra as their daughter's middle name. After all, Ginny was providing her family name in lieu of blood ties, but choosing the first name proved agonizing. Harry leafed through every suggestion he could recall, growing more desperate by the moment. He thought Lily Ginevra Potter sounded sweet, a nod to his beloved mother. Bella Ginevra Potter had a nice ring, too. Bellatrix Light, he joked weakly. But Ginny shot down each proposal with equal firmness. And so, amid well-meaning advice and teasing jibes, the young couple found themselves in a familiar Potter predicament. They simply could not decide on a name. Yet the baby's first cry in the nursery reminded them of what truly mattered, and, they hoped, would inspire the perfect name at last. Neville, ever vigilant, was quick to point out the flaw. That name's far too close to Bellatrix's abbreviation. And now, with only 1 week left until the mid-January individual competition, they still hadn't settled on the child's name. "I owe a huge thanks to my classmates for all their help. Taisha Yunshi, our resident bookworm, Fallen Lucifer, for the monthly pass, and everyone else who offered suggestions and subscribed." Chapter 278, Tree Shadows in His Eyes. Whenever Harry stepped into the Great Hall, conversation died on the spot. A tense silence followed, only to be broken by a low, insistent buzz, like a swarm of angry bees waking from slumber. Heads turned, students rose from their seats, straining for a better view of him. Harry barely noticed. He understood their reaction all too well. If he were in their shoes, facing a figure of such renown, he'd act the same way. After all, his record spoke for itself. First, he'd made his name as a warrior by confronting a fire dragon naked, armed with nothing but his courage and wits, in front of the assembled wizards of Europe. No spells, no enchantments, just raw determination. His triumph had been immortalized on trading cards, posters, even chocolate frog wrappers. Then there was the night of the Yule Ball. Rumors of his dance with Ginny Weasley had swept the castle. Though thanks to Ron's well-timed intervention, most of the student body remained blissfully unaware of the truth behind those whispers. And just last month, following the inter-school team competition, Harry had returned to his dormitory to find an infant curled up on his bed, an unexpected discovery that he met with calm acceptance. Before dawn, he'd acknowledged the child as his own, sparking new murmurs that this little one's raw magical talent might rival Merlin's. So when word went out that Harry would be entering tomorrow's individual tournament, already the most anticipated event of the year, enthusiasm in the wizarding world reached a fever pitch. Every glance, every hush of gossip in the hall was a reminder of his extraordinary reputation. This morning, as he crossed the gleaming floor toward the staff table, broken shafts of sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting delicate tracery of leaves across his face, tree shadows dancing in his eyes. He paused for a moment, letting the light and shade play over him, then settled into his seat, calm and composed. Around him, the murmurs grew louder. But Harry merely lifted his teacup, took a measured sip, and prepared himself for whatever tomorrow might bring. After all, fame was nothing new to him, and neither was the challenge of living up to his own legend. It had been nearly a month since the baby was born, and still everyone in Hogwarts treated Ginny as if she were some exotic creature rather than a close friend they'd known for years. That much Harry had come to accept as normal by now. After potions that morning, he made his way into the Great Hall and took his usual seat at the Gryffindor table. As always, dozens of curious eyes followed him and Ginny, and a hush fell whenever they passed. Harry didn't even bother to look up. They still weren't going to get any reaction out of him. Ginny, beside him, slid a slice of pie across the table. "Pass me those chicken legs, would you?" she snapped. "They look so plump and juicy." Just then, Ron plopped down across from them. He grumbled while reaching for the platter. "I'm not your servant, Gin." "Ron!" Ginny shot him a warning look, and he fell silent. Moments later, she turned back to Harry, her expression softening. "Want some roast chicken?" Harry shook his head with a small smile. "No thanks, I'd like to finish quickly. I want to go up and see Mei Ling." He knew he would never get tired of saying her name. After much debate, their daughter's full name had finally been decided. Mei Ling Lily Ginevra Bella Potter. They'd even added Bella at the end. Harry had explained to a surprised Neville that it means beautiful in Italian. Everything felt right, and Harry couldn't wait to hold his little girl again. Harry's choice of name was meant as a blessing for their child. It had nothing to do with Bellatrix. Neville raised no objections, but not everyone was equally enthusiastic. Professor McGonagall, for her part, approved of Mailing. To the wider wizarding world, the baby would be Mailing Potter, exactly as she'd anticipated. Still, McGonagall couldn't resist teasing that the name felt overly long, 5-syllable, just like Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Her complaint was all in good fun. She knew the final decision belonged to Harry and Ginny. As a bonus, McGonagall's quip revealed Dumbledore's full name to Harry and his friends for the very first time. Later, when Ginny suggested altering their weekend plans, Harry gently declined. She wasn't upset. After all, he'd always put their children first. These days, beyond keeping up with their studies, he was committed to spending every Sunday in Hogsmeade, ensuring they could visit the fire dragon together. His weekends revolved entirely around his family. Ginny actually felt lucky. Their recent reconciliation with Ron meant he, too, could remain by Harry's side, sharing in every precious moment. And that, she thought, was what truly mattered. Ginny lingered in the nursery doorway, watching Harry cradle their newborn against his chest. She ought to have felt nothing but joy, yet a small knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Since the baby's arrival, Harry's every waking moment had been devoted to fatherhood, and neither she nor Ron had much of him left. Truth be told, Ginny was secretly pleased. This child, born as if from thin air, felt as much hers as Harry's. Indeed, once she came of age and married him, the baby would legally be her daughter. Ginny delighted in motherhood without enduring a single contraction or 9 months of discomfort. Still, she couldn't completely relax. Ron, Neville, and Anthony, their roommates, had all sworn they heard Harry shriek "no" in raw agony just before the baby appeared. Had Harry really felt the pains of childbirth? Had he, in some dream state, inhabited a woman's body and pushed a child into the world? The very idea made Ginny's skin tingle. And then there was that curious dream she and Ron had shared, vivid, unsettling, charged with fear of loss. Was it possible Harry's subconscious, anxious about Ginny drifting away to Ron, had channeled those emotions into this miraculous child? If so, in dreaming of life, Harry had given them a bond more powerful than any spell. He had forged a new beginning, one born of both love and the very real fears that bind them together. "Harry, do you want to go together later?" Ginny asked, her eyes bright with a smile. He nodded, and Ron, still chewing on a chicken leg, waved it in the air. "Count me in. The artifact's still in Professor McGonagall's study on the 2nd floor, right?" "Yep," Harry said. "If it had been moved to Madame Pomfrey's or Professor Sprout's, they would have let me know." Ron swallowed the last of his chicken and frowned. "But isn't it odd that Professor Riddle's been there every time we visit? That's Voldemort, isn't it? Since when does he care about a child?" "Harry, child." "The girl, Meiling," Ron replied. "Her birth is a mystery, and they say her magic rivals Merlin's. That would pique anyone's curiosity, even his." "Enough, Ron," Harry snapped, a note of unease creeping into his voice. "He can only access the castle with Dumbledore's permission, and nobody would let him near her without it. Besides, the girl actually seems to like him. Ginny and Ron exchanged worried glances as Harry's expression darkened. He leaned in, speaking in a low voice. Still, something's changed about him lately. Remember what I said? He's like a living unicorn, drawn to purity. Maybe that's why he keeps seeking her out. Ginny peered thoughtfully across the table. Unicorns have that pure kind of magic, she mused, the sort that makes everyone feel warm and safe. Maybe Myling thinks of Professor Riddle the same way, as her own unicorn. Harry nodded. Maybe you're right. They ate in near silence, each of them hurrying through their meal so they could check on the baby. 20 minutes later, the three of them had left the great hall and made their way up to the study on the second floor. A soft fire crackled in the hearth, and in front of it stood Mayling's crib. The baby girl was chattering happily, engrossed in a mock battle with a plush dragon propped at the other end of her cot. She brandished a pillowcase like a knight's sword, lunging and retreating with the earnest determination of a tiny warrior. Harry leaned forward, his expression melting into fond pride. Ginny grasped the crib's edge to steady it, making sure it didn't rock too sharply with each of Mayling's playful swings. On the sofa nearby, Ron crouched down to get a better look at the Hungarian horntail figurine perched on the mantel, his eyes bright with eager curiosity, as though he wanted to join the fray. After a moment, Ron straightened up, a puzzled look on his face. "Harry, did you see that? The dragon's eyes. There was this flicker, like the shadow of a tree moving across them. It almost felt alive." Harry exchanged a glance with Ginny, both of them frozen for an instant by the peculiar observation. But Mayling's delighted giggles broke the spell, and the study filled once more with the warm glow of firelight, and a mother's and father's wonder at their tiny daughter's boundless imagination. Chapter 692, The Secret of the Dragon Doll. The moment Harry's wand shot through the air, it made a sharp, whistling arc, so fast it was as if his arm had multiplied into a dozen. After images rippled from his shoulder to his hip. In that instant, the little dragon doll vanished from baby Mayling's grasp and hovered a good 10 feet away, suspended in midair. Ron blinked. "Blimey, that was quick." Ginny sprang to her feet. "Is she all right? Do you think the doll was cursed or frightened her?" Mayling only giggled, flashing her toothless grin as she reached out with both chubby hands toward Harry's wand. Ginny sagged with relief and shot Ron an embarrassed look. "See? Nothing happened." Harry held the doll up to the fireplace, turning it so the glow of the flames danced in its painted eyes. He studied it closely, his brow furrowed. "There's a scene trapped inside this trinket," he murmured. "I've seen it before. It's the Forbidden Forest, the very realm of Lyle, the Hungarian tree warrior." He lowered the doll and met their anxious gazes. "We need to find out why someone hid a piece of the Forbidden Forest in a child's toy." Harry's eyes lit up suddenly. "Wait, does this mean the figurine isn't just a puzzle solver? It's actually a conduit. It links the doll's senses with the dragon's own perspective." Ginny hesitated, glancing down at baby Mayling, who lay curled in her arms. "But is it too late now? We still have to keep an eye on the children." She sighed when the infant sighed in her sleep. "Okay, Mayling's finally settled. But Harry, you promised Lyle you'd find a way to break the Vila's influence before the tournament begins, and that's tomorrow." Ron tapped his chin. "Tomorrow's Thursday, right? We don't have any morning classes, Harry." Harry nodded. "Exactly. While Mayling sleeps, let's find an empty classroom and experiment with the figurine." He turned the small dragon doll over in his hand. Its painted eyes glimmered in the lantern light. Later that night, they slipped into a deserted third-floor classroom. Harry closed the door softly and took up position in the center of the room. "Lumus Maxima," he commanded. A brilliant beam of white light flooded the space, but the figurine remained inert. Ron frowned. "Still nothing. The illumination charm doesn't trigger the link." Harry lowered his wand. "Okay, let's try something else." Ron stepped forward. "Operatium." A soft wave of magic rippled through the air as words of revealing magic brushed against the dragon's surface. But the doll's eyes stayed dark. Harry rubbed his forehead. "So neither a powerful light spell nor a revealing charm will coax out the dragon's vision. We need a new approach, something that mimics the dragon's own sensory cues." Ginny nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Then let's think, what sort of stimulus would connect us to a dragon's point of view? Heat? Sound? Maybe a resonance charm? Ron exchanged a look with Harry. Right, if we know what kind of magic wakes the dragon's senses, we can channel that through the figurine and hopefully see what Lyle sees. Harry gripped his wand with renewed determination. All right, zero in on the dragon's natural affinities. Let's figure this out before dawn. Harry had cast the darkness spell himself, yet even his own counterspell couldn't lift it. The apparition charm, meant to counter such enchantments, proved just as ineffectual, and none of the other incantations they tried accomplished anything. Could our approach be flawed from the outset? Should we start over? Ginny asked. Harry shook his head. It's not the environment. Skilled wizards often rely on their senses, touch, scent, even sound, to trace the flow of magic. I'd known that in theory, but I'd never really grasped it, until now. Watching you, Ron, as you cast your spell on the dragon figurine, gave me the clue I needed. His green eyes flickered with gray. Ron's expression brightened. So that's why you had me do it. You were studying the spell in action. Ginny gazed at Harry with a mixture of admiration and affection. What did you see? Harry pushed his glasses up his nose. There's a hidden enchantment woven into the main spell, a very concise auxiliary charm that links the dragon's vision to yours. It's clever. The eyes are the most vulnerable point in any creature, yet directing magic precisely through them is notoriously difficult. That's how this darkness holds so firm. It's perfect for targeting a dragon's eyes, Harry said, tracing his finger over the glowing runes. Ron stretched and yawned. So, can we head back now? Harry shook his head. Not quite yet. The text is laid out as a magic circle. I need to reconfigure it into an actual spell. Lyle and I will test it in the Forbidden Forest tomorrow, which gives me tonight to work. But you should return to the castle. I'll let you know as soon as I'm done. He rose and stepped aside, motioning politely toward the door. Ron hesitated in the doorway, eyeing the intricate protective charms Harry had layered around the room. Not even a murmur could escape. An entire banquet could take place here in perfect silence. Even pressing his ear to the door wouldn't help. Suddenly, Ron felt certain this was more than just a translation exercise. Were Harry and Ginny planning another one of their legendary Rose Garden rendezvous? Ginny caught his gaze and flashed him a mischievous grin. You really thought we'd let you get away that easily? Ron cleared his throat, attempting nonchalance. If you'd like, I can fetch a blanket and a pillow, just to be helpful. Although I should warn you, if anyone stumbles in on you two, it won't be pretty. Ginny laughed softly, the corners of her eyes crinkling. A blanket? How thoughtful. But I think we'll manage just fine on our own. Ginny perched on the arm of Harry's chair, flashing him a teasing smile. Come on, Ron, help Harry with his back, will you? Ron scowled, shot Ginny a look, and stomped off in a huff. Harry didn't glance up. He hunched over a sheet of parchment, his quill racing as he worked out the nodal points for his translation circle. A sudden cough escaped him. When did I ever ask for a back rub? He muttered. I need to focus. Ever since he'd discovered that his dream-scrying charm could, bafflingly enough, impregnate someone thousands of miles away while they slept, he'd become almost paranoid about any kind of physical contact. He worried that no amount of cleaning afterward would prevent another accidental incident. Ginny was still a schoolgirl at Hogwarts, and he'd already fathered a child in some far-flung corner of the world thanks to that charm. Better, he decided, to wait until that little one was grown, perhaps even graduated, before risking anything more. He shook his head and bent back to his calculations. A soft footstep, and then his quill slipped from between his fingers and clattered against the stone floor with a sharp click. Harry paused, staring at the pristine sheet before him. Never had his parchment looked so white, so smooth, lit by the hearth's dancing firelight. Date, February 24th, 1994. Today marked the second task of the Triwizard Tournament, the individual competition. It would be an altogether different challenge from the team event, and Harry knew he would need every ounce of his concentration. Before dawn's first light, the students of Hogwarts peered out of their dormitory windows and blinked at an impossible sight. Aside from the familiar expanse of the Black Lake, Slytherin House seemed to dwell in a vast glass aquarium, while Hufflepuff's rooms lay deep underground, near the castle's foundations. But this morning, every house, from Gryffindor to Ravenclaw, awoke to an entirely new panorama. Through their frosted windows, they could see a massive cloud drifting just above the castle rooftops. Crowning that cloud was the original Quidditch pitch, pristine and untouched by time. From the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, which usually mimicked the sky above, every building on that cloud was plainly visible. Smaller wisps of cloud branched off from the en masse, each supporting mysterious towers and halls, and all of them snaked together like a winding roadway through the bright blue sky. Harry bolted upright with a strangled scream. For an instant he was certain their protective wards had failed. Somebody, everyone, must have discovered him. Instinctively, he hammered out the incantations as his heart thundered. Safeguard, full protection, muggle shielding, seal your ears, plug your ears. The final syllables left him breathless. He dared a glance at his side, only to find the warm, soft body that had been curled against him was gone. The blanket beside him lay undisturbed, and the dormitory was empty, except for himself and the eerie hush of dawn. The heavy door beyond us remained firmly shut. A ripple of excited voices filled the air. I had no idea the school was this massive. How do we even get up there? Do we ride Beauxbaton's winged horses? With thanks to Yuchi Jinyan for the monthly ticket and to all classmates for their recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 693, Lantern Festival. While everyone, Harry included, was craning their necks at the majestic floating pavilions drifting above the castle, Ryan had slipped away to indulge in his own private retreat far below. He found himself in a vaulted chamber as vast as the Great Hall, its stone walls lined with gleaming copper pots and polished basins. At one end roared a wide brick hearth, embers crackling and sending sparks dancing across the flagstones. In a recessed alcove carved from a single solid block of rock lay a tiny treasure, a golden cup embossed with a badger's crest, accompanied by two exquisite earrings whose facets caught the firelight and winked back at him. All around, house elves, neatly dressed in miniature Hogwarts uniforms, hustled back and forth, balancing silver trays heaped with plates, goblets, and cutlery. Yet at the grand 8 Immortals table sat a lone wizard who seemed to have appeared out of thin air. He ate calmly, entirely ignored by the busy elves. Normally, any guest's arrival would set them at witter, rushing forward with fresh platters or bows of greeting, but here they passed him without so much as a nod. Ryan paused mid-forkful. He stared at the silent diner, then at the indifferent staff. "Is this how they do things?" he murmured to himself. The sight of the floating buildings might hold everyone else spellbound, but nothing fascinated Ryan more than this peculiar kitchen court indifference. A tempting tray of steaming dumplings drifted past him. Shrugging off his bewilderment, Ryan snagged one, took a hearty bite, and decided to solve the mystery only after he'd satisfied his appetite. On the table before him lay a strangely mismatched set of utensils, a pair of mahogany chopsticks, polished to a burnished glow and capped with gilded ends, a bowl whose wide mouth curved down to a narrow foot, its exterior casually painted with a rooster in bold strokes of red, dark green, and black, and a porcelain plate sketched with pine and bamboo in simple, monochrome brushstrokes. The food itself felt just as out of place in the Hogwarts Great Hall. White dumplings, pillowy orbs of glutinous rice flour, rested in a clear broth brightened by slivers of green onion. To most students, February 24th marked the start of the individual magical competition, but to Ryan, and to Lane and the few others who still honored the ancient customs of their Far Eastern homeland, it was also the Lantern Festival. That explained why he sat beside the gleaming Hufflepuff cup, the very emblem of the house's fine dining, tucking into his tanguan. Yet these were no sweet sesame balls. Each dumpling was packed with spiced minced pork, flecks of green and red pepper, and fragrant seasonings, just the way Ryan remembered them from his childhood as Zhou Yi back home. Ryan could almost pity himself. None of his classmates, Chu Zhang, Su Li, or the other Chinese Americans in their year, seemed to remember or care about the Lunar New Year. Since February 10th, the first day of the celebration, Ryan had been on break for a full 2 weeks. He deliberately skipped nearly all his classes, leaving Hermione and Luna to carry on without him. He only showed up when the bell rang, and even then, he never set foot in potions. Instead, he spent those mornings slurping hot pot while Professor Snape glared at him in deep resentment. Still, Ryan's vacation wasn't entirely carefree. February 14th was Valentine's Day, and anyone with a girlfriend knew that this holiday was more like navigating a minefield. Every gift needed perfect thought behind it. Every romantic gesture had to be faultless, and if things weren't up to par, he could bet his diary would be under the magnifying glass and compared line by line to his usual behavior. In other words, even a 2-week break came with its own set of trials. Chapter 12. Fractures in Festivities. If you're not making any progress, it means you're not embracing the holidays, Ryan teased Hermione, trying to lighten the mood. But Hermione bristled. What began as playful banter quickly escalated into a heated argument, driving a wedge between them. Thankfully, Luna Lovegood remained blissfully indifferent to their squabble. Straightforward and unfazed by pomp or ceremony, Luna refused to play referee, and that was a relief. After all, she was nothing like the gossip-hungry fairies Hermione had been complaining about, the ones who delighted in finding fault and blowing every trivial misstep out of proportion. In 20th century Britain, there were no Douyin or TikTok platforms stoking endless conflict between men and women. If there had been, Ryan joked, Hermione would already be the most notorious chatterbox in the wizarding world. Even after Ryan's gentle coaching, Hermione couldn't let go of her indignation toward Bellatrix Lestrange. Children should never be torn from their mothers, Hermione insisted, her voice trembling with righteous outrage. It's inhumane. Ryan led her to a Pensieve basin and dropped in a single memory. As the scene played out before Hermione's eyes, she saw exactly what had happened. After the child's mother died, Bellatrix had stepped in, claiming the orphaned girl as her own. Though the child's future remained uncertain, she was alive, saved from a far darker fate by Bellatrix's unexpected act of guardianship. Hermione watched in stunned silence, the truth washing over her. For once, she had no words. Yet Ryan knew better than to assume her convictions had permanently shifted. There would be more debates, more challenges to her carefully held beliefs, before they both truly understood the shades of gray in every story. Hermione had come to a simple conclusion over the years. It's better to have no books at all than to be weighed down by every volume in existence. She'd shed her collection of superstitious tomes, convinced that knowledge must be both rigorous and reliable. Yet even with her awakened imagination and her almost prophetic insight, she still exhibited blind spots in her reasoning, gaps that logic alone couldn't fill. Her kindness was never in question, but her tendency to draw conclusions from incomplete evidence often led her astray. Ryan knew this all too well. He loved Hermione, flaws and all. Her stubbornness, after all, was part of the person he'd fallen for. Yes, he hoped she'd grow more open-minded, but he accepted that change couldn't be forced. His greatest act of love was to keep his complaints to himself. So when Hermione's latest misstep sent her reasoning into a tailspin, Ryan simply shook his head as he stood alone in the kitchen, muttering about her short-circuit brain under his breath. Meanwhile, outside the castle grounds, Harry Potter tilted his head back to study the most extraordinary sight, a glowing pattern arcing across the dawn sky, every color of the rainbow swirling together like living brushstrokes. He blinked, astonished, before the thought of Ginny flashed through his mind. He needed to know if she'd seen it too. First stop, the Gryffindor common room. He found Luna Lovegood there, humming to herself as she sorted through a collection of odd-shaped pebbles. "Luna," Harry blurted, "did Ginny see the sky this morning?" Luna looked up with dreamy silver eyes. "Ginny had no classes today, Harry. She's in the auditorium already." She pointed toward the eastern wing. "Thanks," he said, relief flooding him. Without another word, Harry hurried down the corridor and up the grand staircase, his mind racing with questions. What was that strange display? Why had it appeared now? And most importantly, what did it mean for all of them? He paused just outside the auditorium doors, took a deep breath, and pushed them open, ready to face whatever came next. Harry rounded the corner and almost collided with Ron, who was leaning close to Lavender. Startled, Ron yanked his arm away from Lavender's shoulder, his expression betraying sudden guilt. Lavender, convinced they'd wanted a private chat, slipped off to join Parvati at the Gryffindor table. In doing so, she barely registered the awkward tension, apart from noting Hermione watching them with sharp-backed curiosity. Over the past 3 years, rumors of a romance between Harry and Ron had bubbled around Hogwarts, and by now their classmates simply took it for granted. Lavender believed it too, but Harry knew the truth. Ron's heart still belonged to Ginny. He studied his friend's restless gaze and clenched jaw. "What's going on, Ron?" Harry demanded. "I saw you just now with Lavender. She's a great person. Treating her like a prop isn't right." Ron's eyes darkened. He ran a hand through his hair and swallowed. I'm angry," he admitted at last. "Angry because you weren't back in the dorm last night. You must have crossed the line with Ginny again." "Don't change the subject," Ron demanded. Harry forced a bitter smile. He was about to argue, but Ginny's name jolted him back to what mattered. "Ron, have you seen Ginny? She went missing early this morning." Ron snorted. "Oh, so now you want to talk about Ginny. Weren't you two together all last night?" With a flick of his wand, Harry cast a hushed charm over their immediate area, forcing Ron to lower his voice. He fixed his friend with a hard stare. "Why are you glaring at me? You think that makes up for leading Ginny astray?" Ron bristled. "I'm not denying it, but she vanished as soon as she got up. I've searched everywhere, and she's nowhere to be found." Before Harry could reply, a familiar voice drifted over from the corridor. "What are you two whispering about? I can't hear a thing." Harry and Ron turned to see Victor Krum striding toward them, his forehead creasing in confusion. Chapter 694, Preparations Before the Match. Krum opened his mouth to speak, but his voice died the moment it left his lips, swallowed by some invisible barrier. Harry gave a slight shrug and extended the silencing jinx until Krum was entirely enveloped by its silent field. 3 minutes later, the spell faded. With a relieved exhale, Krum's tense expression softened. Protected by Harry's magic, he raised his voice without restraint. "Harry, have you worked out the riddle yet?" Ron, who had been pacing anxiously, shot back. "What does that matter? My sister's been kidnapped." Harry held up a hand to calm him, then turned to Krum, deep in thought. Could it be? Krum's face went serious, though his tone carried a grim cheerfulness. "You've guessed correctly. That's exactly it. Ginny's been taken hostage." He paused, then recited the cryptic couplet they'd received. "When you hunt, be sure to measure. We've seized your most sacred treasure." Ron's eyes widened as the rhyme sank in. "So that's it," he murmured, relief and dread warring in his voice. Then he leveled an impatient look at Krum. "What treasure could they be talking about?" "Don't you know Harry's got the treasure?" Ron blurted out. "Ron!" Harry began to protest, but it was too late. All he managed was to call Ron's name, a silent rebuke at his friend's brusqueness. Yes, it was a bit rude. Victor Krum just shrugged. "It's fine. Ron's actually right. They've been hunting for my baby forever. Can't say I blame them. I don't have anyone I truly care about back at Durmstrang. If you look at everyone here at Hogwarts, there's only you, Ron, Elvas, Neville, Ginny, Lavender, and Gray, my partner from the Christmas ball." "Your baby?" Ron echoed, eyebrows raised. "Who else could I mean but Gray?" Krum replied with a small smile. "We've kept in touch since the ball. Every morning, we'd walk by the Black Lake together. Except today. She didn't show up, so I guess I assumed everyone was looking for her." He trailed off, then fixed Ron with a bemused look, as if surprised anyone needed that spelled out. Of all the people at Hogwarts, only Gray fit the bill. Had Ron guessed Lavender, Krum would have been convinced Arthur Weasley had lost track of his own son. Realizing the conversation was veering into awkward territory, Harry and Victor exchanged a few polite comments before smoothly steering the topic away from the game. Harry paused in the corridor and called after Victor with a sudden informality. "Wiggy, sorry, Victor. Ginny's all right. I'll go check on the baby first." With that, the three of them went their separate ways. As Victor walked off, he couldn't help wondering why Harry had slipped so easily into that nickname. Harry, meanwhile, didn't head for the nursery at all. His steps faltered as a single thought pounded through his mind. It's over. Someone's already guessed about Ginny and me. Earlier, Victor had mentioned which members of the Wizengamot were overseeing the inquiry, and that they might even try to use Ginny, and possibly the baby, as hostages to force a confession. What if they were already at the nursery door, demanding Ginny's presence? It would be a disaster, especially now that Mr. Weasley sat on the bench and Dumbledore himself had taken a direct hand in the case. The idea of being hauled in front of them made Harry's cheeks burn. He couldn't turn to Ron for sympathy. He knew all too well what Ron would say. "I told you so. Don't get cozy with Ginny next time." That familiar lecture had driven a wedge between them before. No wonder Ginny and Ron had broken up months ago. Ron never missed an opportunity to lecture her. A soft laugh pulled Harry back to the present. Ginny was leaning against the nursery doorframe, a teasing smile on her lips. "Harry," she asked, arching an eyebrow, "why are you looking at me like that?" "Aren't you going to see the hatchling?" Ron asked, studying Harry's face. Something in Harry's eyes seemed off. Harry shook his head, glancing away. "Not right now. I've finally cracked the spell that links a wizard's mind to a dragon's, but I haven't tested it yet. The competition starts this afternoon, so I'd better get to Lyle's." Ron narrowed his eyes. Old Ron would have believed Harry without a second thought, but these days he fancied himself a bit sharper. Noticing Ron's skepticism, Harry pressed on. "Besides, Hagrid's acting is really improving." "Acting? Hagrid?" Ron echoed, momentarily abandoning his doubts. Harry's grin widened. "You remember him nearly breaking down when he let the cat out of the bag? Well, it turns out the key to this contest isn't chanting slogans or drilling complicated commands. Dragons just don't learn that way, even under Hagrid's magic. Instead, they respond to clear, simple cues. Over the past few days, I've been training Lyle on just 4 signals: up, down, left, and right. But the real secret to winning is right here." He reached inside his cloak and produced a small, dragon-shaped doll, its eyes gleaming in the afternoon light. "This," Harry said, holding it up, "is what will decide the match. It isn't just a puzzle prop, it also conceals a powerful suppression spell. Once the enchantment takes hold, the dragon can see through our eyes, freeing us from all concerns and allowing full-throttle flight. The only catch is speed. Lyle's Hungarian horntail simply isn't the fastest. If mine had been a Peruvian vipertooth, I'd win every race, and even Fleur would struggle to keep up." "Does Narvis know about this?" someone asked. "Probably not," Harry admitted. "The moment the dragon figurine resonates with those dragon leather earmuffs in midair, the spell activates. Whatever the dragon sees is projected back to us through the firelight." He couldn't help but smile at his own cleverness. They retraced their steps to the Great Hall, grabbed a quick lunch, then slipped out of the castle and headed straight for the Forbidden Forest. Deep within its shadowed heart, they followed a winding tree-lined path until a sudden roar, like a car engine igniting, echoed from the darkness ahead. Dead branches and rotting leaves rained down around them, stirred by some unseen tremor. Stepping into a small clearing, they froze. There, before them, stood Harry, hand resting gently on the massive flank of a dragon. His eyes were closed, calm and focused, as if listening to the creature's very heartbeat and preparing them both for the adventure to come. Harry closed his eyes. A subtle current of energy pulsed from both their bodies, lifting dead branches and rotten leaves from the forest floor and rustling his bangs. Boom! The Hungarian horntail's massive heart roared in its chest. A golden thread of magic streamed from Harry's palm, pressed against the dragon's scaly hide into its half-closed eyes. With a sudden motion, the horntail opened them. The cold, yellow vertical slits were gone, replaced by warm, round green irises. Harry drew his wand and gave the air a gentle tap. Moisture from the ground and the misty atmosphere coalesced into a perfect silver mirror. He stared at the reflection of someone both familiar and utterly strange. His own face, framed by tousled hair, but with bright yellow dragon pupils burning between the whites of his eyes that radiated the serene authority of a top predator. Beside him, Lyle the fire dragon lashed his bronze-spiked tail, uneasy. From Lyle's perspective, Harry had become that little man Hagrid had commanded it to obey. Had it not recognized those unmistakable eyes, Lyle might have believed him to be something, and someone, entirely different. It shook its head, but the vision didn't fade. And yet, inexplicably, a profound calm washed over it, an unprecedented comfort filling its mind. Along with that calm came an instinctive trust in the small figure standing by its side. Chapter 282, The Body Approaching the Realm of the Gods. After finishing the sticky rice dumplings, Ryan, who had just teleported to Atlantis, felt a sudden spark of awareness. The probe he'd implanted in Harry's body was sending fresh data, and through it, Ryan's understanding deepened. Before this, Harry's union of light and darkness, his perfect balance of yin and yang, had forged a new, flawless magic drawn from two worlds. That breakthrough had nudged Ryan forward in his own cultivation, lifting him beyond the 7th level of the divine tier. Now, however, the ancient, single-purpose magic of the dragon trainer was undergoing yet another qualitative transformation at Harry's command. Ryan's consciousness, his mind's eye, perceived the previously invisible, immaterial magic as if wrapped in delicate tendrils of thought. Then before him, the unseen strands of cause and effect took shape, a dense web of silken threads radiating from the spell's core. This web spanned time and space, charting the spell's origin, tracing its every wielder, and storing detailed records of each mage who had ever mastered it. As Ryan studied this living tapestry, he realized the spell's true pedigree. It had first been cast in the 13th century by the Archmagus Aegon Targaryen. In that moment, Ryan understood that Harry was not merely wielding ancient power, he was redefining its very essence. And as the web of magic stretched ever wider, Ryan felt a surge of anticipation. The realm of the gods beckoned, and Harry's new spell was the key to unlocking its gates. Chapter 6. The Flameblood Bond. In the far-flung corners of the Targaryen domain, ordinary muggles lived side by side with a dazzling variety of fire dragons. The defining trait of House Targaryen was its uncanny tolerance for heat. To them, fire was as essential and refreshing as water is to ordinary humans. Exposed to a dragon's blaze, a Targaryen might feel only a pleasant warmth, so intense that the dragon fire itself felt like a satisfying feast. The dragons, in turn, sensed this kinship and accepted the Targaryens as their own. No other wizarding family had ever come so close to these legendary beasts. Over the centuries, Targaryen mages devised countless spells to communicate with, train, and even ride fire dragons. In fact, nearly all dragon-taming magic in the known world sprang from their household. Yet this extraordinary bond proved to be a double-edged sword. For all their prestige, most Targaryen spells were astonishingly simple and applicable only to fire dragons. In their eyes, dragons were living wands, the exclusive conduit for their power. That magical link, however, never truly merged dragon consciousness with wizarding intent. It remained little more than a one-way bridge. History books are full of these perspective-sharing charms, yet none ever achieved complete, mutual communion. Until Harry Potter arrived. When Harry's emerald gaze met that of the great fire dragon perched on the cliff's edge, something unprecedented occurred. A genuine exchange of sight and spirit. Through that shared glance, the dragon recognized in Harry the same gentle soul it had once trusted in Hagrid. And Harry, for his part, felt a strange warmth coil around his heart, an unfamiliar primal fire awakening deep within his veins. From that moment on, the dragon regarded Harry not as a stranger, but as a true equal. And Harry himself emerged from their encounter changed, his body humming with the echo of dragonfire, as if some part of the beast had taken permanent residence in his soul. What began as a simple bonding spell had blossomed into something far more profound, the first true melding of dragon and wizard in Targaryen history. Under Ryan's X-ray vision, capable of piercing flesh from bone marrow to every strand of hair, he watched a subtle transformation taking place beneath Harry's skin. Fine ridges of dragon scale were slowly emerging, as if Harry's very flesh were reverting to an ancient draconic form. Even more astonishing, the spell that had temporarily linked them had so lidified into something permanent. Now Harry could sever the connection at will, instantly restoring himself to his undisturbed human state, as though nothing had ever happened. Should he ever wish to re-establish the bond, all it would take was a thought. He could even decide whose perceptions would dominate the link, so long as he remembered in time to break it when it suited him. As for Ryan, the benefits were immeasurable. Through this newfound psychic conduit, he had gleaned secrets of draconic power no autopsy or microscope could reveal. He had tapped into the vestigial essence of the ancient dragons, encoded deep within the blood of this modern, degenerated specimen. No journey back through time could have granted him such knowledge. For in the age of myth, dragons were known by a different name, the very embodiment of natural phenomena and cataclysm, raw power made flesh, the ultimate personification of destruction. Chapter X, Ascension of the Fire Dragon's Scales. The resilient scales of the fire dragon had become Ryan's ultimate defense, each gleaming plate a testament to pure, unfiltered violence. His body transformation reached level 6, surging from 79% to 84%. At this stage, even a single percent can spell the difference between victory and defeat. Wizards matched in skill, intelligence, and combat instincts may tear each other apart when separated by less than 1% of power. Ryan felt that leap of progress coursing through his veins. By absorbing the raw, ancient force of the dragons, his flesh had been irrevocably reforged, one step closer to godhood. In all of magical history, not even the legendary Elder Wizards, those deified paragons from a bygone era, had mastered such a feat. They reshaped their spells, honed their arcana, but never their mortal forms. Aside from this profound metamorphosis, most enhancements in the magical arts remain indirect: greater mana affinity, enhanced vitality, or bolstered spell resistance. Yet none fortify the body itself. Even a so-called divine wizard, draped in celestial power, still owes his survival to fragile flesh, and could, in theory, be pierced by a mortal's blade or felled by a furious mob. But Ryan was no ordinary mage. His new scales did more than repel fire and steel. They embodied the very fury of dragons long extinct. As he flexed his arms, molten light danced beneath his skin. In that moment, he realized just how far he'd come, and how far he still had to go to stand among the gods. Chapter 7, A Path Unlike Any Other. But Ryan was different. The data analysis made it clear. Even without a wand, he could defeat a demigod-level wizard, one who hovered on the edge of godhood, using only his physical strength. Most wizards in this world never train for close-quarters combat. Their skill in magic is vast, but up close, they are vulnerable. Against them, Ryan's unarmed blows would land with devastating effect. At body transformation level 3, his speed and power already eclipse ordinary human limits. That alone might be enough to fell a level 6 demigod wizard in a single strike. This was exactly the curve he intended to follow from the beginning. Rather than competing toe-to-toe in magical duels, he would upgrade his flesh and bone until his body itself became the ultimate weapon. Wizards, especially those in the Harry Potter universe, often enjoy longer health bars than muggles. Their innate magic grants them greater resistance to injury and the ability to recover from wounds that would kill a non-magical human. Yet if they don't undergo their own magical transformations, they remain vulnerable to any attack that bypasses spell work. For Ryan, there was no such weakness. Every aspect of his body, physical resilience, magic resistance, endurance, vitality, even adaptability to new spells, grew in perfect synchronization. In effect, his body transformation skill merged the best attributes of multiple magical disciplines into one ultimate art. No incantation, no wand motion, just the raw, honed power of his flesh. And with each level he advanced, Jan drew ever closer to the day when even the mightiest demigod wizard would fall before him. Without a natural affinity for magic, no amount of hard work ever yields true results. A flawless, self-sustaining miracle, one that always bends exactly the right way, would take the combined efforts of every wizard in the world studying transfiguration and physical metamorphosis for a full century. That's precisely why Ryan's breakthrough is so monumental. Of course, his success wasn't predestined. It sprang from a single, impulsive act last autumn when he secretly embedded a wedge of pure magic into Harry's body. "Harry," Ryan murmured, stepping through the thin gray veil that had drifted into the room, "you're worthy of being my most important crucible." With a crisp snap of his fingers, Harry's blurred vision sharpened, his eyes returning to their normal hue. "Ryan, you," Harry began, but his words cut off as the ornate mirror before him liquefied into vapor, its enchantment collapsing under the weight of his startled magic. Nearby, Lyle, the Hungarian tree giant who'd been leaning forward in curiosity, recoiled in terror. He buried his massive, bark-like hands over his face as a primal fear surged through him, so fierce that, without Ryan's control, the ancient creature might have been frightened to death. Ryan placed a calm hand on Harry's shoulder. "You need to learn control," he said quietly. A faint, invisible spark of light drifted down and settled on Harry's brow. As it touched him, he sensed more than just his eyes shifting. The very core of his mind trembled with change. He staggered back, heart pounding. "Did I almost turn into some kind of monster?" he whispered, voice shaky. Ryan didn't hesitate. "You formed a contract with the Pluto dragon, one of the oldest, most powerful of its kind. The surge you just unleashed wasn't ordinary magic. It was dragon magic, and it was reshaping you." Harry swallowed hard. "If you hadn't stopped me, what would have happened?" Ryan's expression stayed calm but serious. "Your body would have started to memorize that temporary transformation, making it permanent. You'd have begun to manifest scales, claws, maybe even breathe that strange crimson fire. Once your physiology learns a new form, it carries on, whether you want it to or not." "So I won't be able to use it again?" Harry asked, relief and disappointment mingling in his voice. "Not in that raw, uncontrolled way," Ryan replied. "Right now, your blood has been altered by potions we administered. That's buying us time. If your magical control isn't razor sharp, you'll constantly crave the power of that draconic flame. Worse, your body would instinctively revert to a half-dragon state every time you tapped into it. We need to train you to integrate that magic safely, so you never risk a permanent transformation." Harry ran a hand over his brow where the spark had rested. He felt a strange tingling, like a reminder of what almost was. "Then let's get to work," he said, determination simmering beneath his surprise. "I'm not going to lose myself to dragonfire." Ryan nodded. "Good. We'll start your ritual training tomorrow at dawn. Tonight, rest. Your true test begins when you learn to wield that power without becoming consumed by it." Harry glanced at the moonlit horizon, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He had come this far by magic, and now, more than ever, he understood how dangerous that gift could be. But he wouldn't let it turn him into something he no longer recognized. Not while he still had the choice. Chapter 696, Food Sacrifice Magic. Harry let out a long, relieved breath. "Thanks, Ryan. That was a huge help." Ryan only gave him a curt nod. "I've got to go." And just like that, he vanished. Harry frowned, wondering why Ryan had departed so abruptly. Before he could puzzle it out, a familiar voice drifted down the corridor, the one person he least wanted to see. "Harry, there you are!" Arthur Weasley, his father-in-law, came hurrying toward him, looking as excited as he was anxious. Harry had left him behind only moments ago, separated by a single door that morning, and now here he was again. "I ran into Ron at Hagrid's," Mr. Weasley panted, glancing up and down the hallway. "He said you solved the riddle. Molly's been worried sick about you." The words tumbled out in a jumble, and Harry realized with sinking certainty why Mr. Weasley had really come, to talk about the game. His awkward pauses and nervous glances left no doubt. Behind Mr. Weasley, the fire dragon Lyle lay on the floor, eyes covered by a makeshift blindfold. Harry knew he couldn't claim the dragon was too dangerous for visitors, or pretend he was unused to company this time. He'd need to come up with something better, and quick. Ryan took a deep breath, and after a moment's hesitation, spoke up in his most formal tone. "Is Professor Dumbledore here this morning?" The hall fell unnervingly silent. Across from him, Mr. Weasley paused mid-gesture, one hand automatically rubbing his bald spot. He glanced down at the paperwork before him and cleared his throat. "No, he isn't. It's just me today. Have you tidied everything up?" "Yes," Ryan replied. "Good." A beat passed before Ryan ventured. "Excuse me, what was that?" Mr. Weasley tapped his quill against the desk, as if checking his own notes. "At 2:00, all competitors are to assemble at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. There, you'll mount your assigned dragons, one by one, and fly to the Quidditch pitch above Hogwarts. That will be the official starting point of the competition." Ryan nodded briskly and slipped away. He couldn't say the real reason for his hasty exit was that Arthur Weasley's presence unnerved him. He could easily mask his own aura and remain unseen if he wished. No, the truth was more mundane. He never quite felt comfortable around large groups of boys, not even Harry, his best friend. And, if he'd stayed any longer, he'd have missed the unlikely sight of Harry charging in with all guns blazing, and Mr. Weasley fussing over whether the grounds were prepared. With nothing left to do but wait for the contest, Ryan hurried off to meet Hermione. They had one last task to complete before they could join the others. Time, 1:30 p.m. Location, the Great Hall, Hogwarts, already packed wall to wall with students. Most of the students filed into the Great Hall and took their places at the long, house-road tables just as they would for any ordinary feast. Yet today something felt different. The Quidditch hopefuls who had stood ready a moment ago had vanished, and low murmurs of speculation rippled through the crowd. Every so often, eyes drifted upward to the enchanted ceiling, where pillowy white clouds floated overhead, and to the unfamiliar sight of the Quidditch field suspended high above them. Excitement crackled in the air as everyone wondered what spectacular method would carry them skyward. At the Ravenclaw table, however, there was a conspicuous gap in the center. The students on either side exchanged uneasy glances, their chatter stifled by the empty chair. Hermione sat just to the right of that seat, her curiosity piqued. Leaning in, Ryan, who should have been the one to fill the space, spoke softly. "Hermione, can you recite it for me again?" Only recently had Hermione discovered Ryan's remarkable secret. He didn't actually need to eat. Fascinated, she'd begged him to teach her the enchantment that allowed him to forgo meals. More hours for reading, for practicing magic. She thought it a pursuit worthy of her time. Now, as the hall buzzed with anticipation, Hermione took a steadying breath and prepared to learn the spell once more, determined to commit every precise word to memory. Hermione cleared her throat and began to recite from memory. "Those who eat grass are fleet of foot but dull of mind. Those who eat meat are brave and fierce. Those who eat grain are wise and clever. Those who live on the air of heaven and earth are luminous and long-lived. And those who refuse all food become immortal gods." She smiled and explained, "This verse comes from Da Dai Li Yi Benming, compiled by Dai Dai during the Western Han dynasty. In essence, it categorizes beings by their sustenance. Grazing creatures move swiftly but lack intelligence. Carnivores possess courage and strength. Grain eaters gain wisdom and wit. Those who draw nourishment from the very air of heaven and earth enjoy radiant health and extended lifespans, and those who subsist on nothing at all transcend mortality. The food-giving spell I'm about to teach you is based on this principle. In the Far Eastern magical tradition, we refer to that nourishing air of heaven and earth, the subtle energies that flow through all things. If we translate the idea for our own world, it's akin to what we call the magic magnetic field. It dips and rises everywhere, but grows especially strong wherever wizards gather. Hogwarts, with over 1,000 years of enchantments layered into its walls, boasts the most potent field of all. It's so powerful, in fact, that ordinary electrical devices simply won't work here. A student raised her hand. "Does that mean studying here will be easier? And is this food-giving magic difficult to learn?" Hermione's eyes twinkled. "You'll find your time at Hogwarts both challenging and rewarding, but yes, you'll be well supported. As for the spell itself, it's not beyond any of you. With practice and the right understanding of the magical field, you'll master it in no time." Hermione stepped into the empty auditorium, its high ceiling and rows of silent benches waiting to be filled with magic. She glanced around, half expecting someone, anyone, to appear. Instead, she heard Ryan's voice in her mind, calm and confident. "You can think of this place as a tapestry of magic," he said. "Because I've practiced my food-granting charm here so many times, the very stones hold residual energy. All you have to do is connect with those traces." Hermione lifted her wand, uncertain. "So what else do I need to prepare?" "Nothing more than what you already have. Your wand, focus, and this room's magical residue. You won't be starting from scratch. The real challenge isn't breadth, but depth. In terms of difficulty, it's on the same level as the Phoenix Incarnation I taught you last term." She froze. Mastering the Phoenix Incarnation had nearly broken her, and she'd only succeeded because she'd invoked the demonic moon Ryan summoned for her. Without that lunar blessing, she would have failed utterly. "Are you going to help me the same way?" she asked, glancing toward the exit. Though invisible to everyone else, Ryan's presence made her uneasy. Hundreds of students pass through these halls each day. What if someone sensed the raw power? "I'll guide you, but the work will be yours," he replied. "If all goes as I expect, you'll command the food-granting charm in under half an hour." Hermione's pulse quickened. 30 minutes to learn a spell as demanding as the Phoenix Incarnation? It sounded impossible, and yet if this auditorium truly held the echoes of Ryan's past practice, perhaps she could do it. Taking a steadying breath, she raised her wand. The next 30 minutes would prove whether she could rise to the challenge or be crushed by it. Ryan's eyes gleamed with quiet intensity as he shook his head. No, Hermione, you've misunderstood. It isn't the moon itself that changes. It's an ancient force we call the Goobly fairy fire. Hermione frowned. Fairy fire? I've only ever heard it's a rare magical flame, one even the strongest wizards can summon only a handful of times in their entire lives. Precisely. Ryan tapped his wand against his palm. This magic isn't born of spells as we know them. It draws directly on the so-called magic magnetic field, the lifeblood of the earth and sky. That field can replenish itself infinitely, granting a measure of immortality to anything that learns to harness it. Hermione's brow rose. So it's like the wizard who gave up conventional magic and lived on pure ambient energy? Ryan gave a slow nod. Exactly. Think of Goobly fairy fire as a lunar blessing, tapping that vast reservoir of power. A wizard who masters it no longer relies on incantations or ritual components. Instead, they become conduits for the energy that permeates all living things. He flicked his wrist, and a roll of ancient parchment unfurled midair, landing softly in Hermione's hands. The vellum was inscribed from edge to edge with densely packed symbols and runes. Hermione's pulse quickened as she traced the elegant script. "What is this?" she whispered. "This," Ryan said, voice low, "is the sacrificial feast spell. It's one of the oldest and most demanding branches of ancient magic. You'll find its structure more like a ritual than a modern incantation. It's lengthy and fraught with hidden traps, but I believe you're more than ready." Hermione took a deep breath, her fingertips brushing the parchment. The room seemed to grow silent, charged with promise. She met Ryan's steady gaze and straightened. "Then show me how to begin." Ryan smiled reassuringly. "Once you chant the incantation, I'll impart the Goobly's fairy fire to you. All you need to do is clear your mind and body, then welcome the flame. It will serve as a bridge to the magical ether, converting its energy into the nutrients your body requires. The conversion process is extremely complex, but you don't have to memorize every step. They're embedded in the spell itself. With practice, you'll grow accustomed to it. Whenever hunger strikes, simply whisper the incantation to initiate the transformation." Hermione tilted her head, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "So I only need to learn the words? Even though I haven't been trained, I'll be able to absorb and transmute the aether's power through your magic?" "Precisely," Ryan replied. "At first, you'll depend on my guidance. As you continue, your body will internalize the sequence, how Goobly's fairy fire draws in the ambient ether, weaves it into a net in response to your chant, and then transmutes it into the sustenance you need. Now let's begin." He extended his right hand. A pale, translucent flame, like distilled spirit of heaven and earth, flickered into existence above his palm, its gentle warmth promising a new source of power. Hermione laid the parchment out on the table. Studying the phonetic symbols written beneath the spell, she parted her pearly white lips, preparing to pronounce each sound precisely.